Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. As you can see in the picture today, let's start the story of what if I was overpowered and joined the Kuoh Academy and got harem. Support the author High School DxD Human Potential, OC Reader, by Ritaro123 and his fanfic link in the description. Good morning my dear readers, here I bring you a new story starring the same character from my Boku no Hero story I Can Be a Hero Too. As always, High School DxD does not belong to me, all rights to Ichii Ishibumi. Cold sweat trickled down Hideki's forehead as his mind was trapped in a nightmare. In his sleep, shadows stretched around him, as if the darkness itself were trying to envelop him, immobilize him. A bright glow broke the blackness, and there he was, a man with bright blonde hair and outlandish clothes in shades of pink and purple, almost as if he belonged in some sinister carnival. The man's smile was sharp, stretching across his face like that of a playful predator. His mere presence made the air thicker, making it difficult to breathe. Hideki muttered, trying to move, but his feet felt heavy, as if they were nailed to the ground. Oh, you wonder who I am, boy? The man's voice was mocking, almost musical, but with an underlying malice that chilled the blood. That doesn't matter, what matters is where you're going. The man extended his hand, and a portal of dark energy began to form behind Hideki. Before he could react, he felt the invisible force pulling him into the vortex. The air whistled in his ears as his body was violently pulled into the darkness. Wait! Why? Hideki tried to ask, but his voice was drowned out by the pressure surrounding him. His body fell into the void, an abyss of shadows and lightning that swallowed him without mercy. The man just watched him from above, his smile growing wider. Oh, the fun is just beginning, little hero. Enjoy your new home. The words echoed in Hideki's mind as he fell, until everything became a muffled scream, drowned by the abyss. Hideki woke with a start. His breathing was uneven, and for a second, he wasn't sure where he was. The shadows in his room, the soft glow of the moon coming through the window, everything felt different, unfamiliar. He was no longer in his own world, but in a place filled with dangers he didn't yet know. Then he remembered that hadn't been a nightmare, but his current reality. He wasn't sure how much time had passed since he'd arrived in this world, one where, unlike his own, humans didn't have quirks. He remembered for a second the dream he had, the only clue as to how he had gotten to this place. The only difference between the dream and what actually happened is that the man never spoke to him. It was surely his mind trying to give him more clues that didn't exist. He looked at his room with disdain. It was small, barely big enough for a futon on the floor and a small circular table. Despite everything, he didn't have many other options. This was his life now. He stood up reluctantly. Coming into this world with nothing but the clothes on his back had been a challenge. He had spent weeks of uncertainty searching for a place to stay until, a little over a month ago, a small family consisting of his parents and their 7-year-old son, owners of a family restaurant, offered him a job as an act of kindness. They also allowed him to sleep in this small room that was part of the restaurant. Hideki sighed, staring at the ceiling wearily. He knew he should be grateful, but his mind kept wondering how he'd ended up in this place so different from anything he'd ever known. He checked the time on his phone, which read 4:24 a.m., a little earlier than usual, as he usually got up at 5 a.m. He sighed, knowing he wouldn't be able to sleep anymore. He got up, grabbed his keys, and changed into some more athletic clothes. He stepped out into the fresh early morning air and began jogging, as part of his daily routine. The streets were deserted at this hour, something Hideki was grateful for. As he ran, he looked curiously at the city he was in, Kuoh, located in Japan. The reason he was so curious was because, in his world, this city didn't exist. However, the city of Muzurifu, which in his world was a bustling metropolis full of heroes, didn't seem to be present in this strange place. Everything I knew felt like a distant memory, almost as if it belonged to another life. He continued with his daily training routine. It wasn't as demanding as the one he used to do in his home world before arriving here. This was probably partly due to his emotional state, affected by the uncertainty of being in a completely unfamiliar place. It was also because this new world seemed peaceful compared to his own. There were no heroes or villains, nor the constant threats and battles he was used to. The streets were calm, and life seemed to follow a more normal pace, at least on the surface. Hideki finished his morning run, returning to the restaurant he now called home. The sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, bathing the city in hues of orange and gold. He entered the small kitchen and began preparing breakfast, something simple but nutritious. He was cooking not only for himself, but also for the family who had taken him in. It was a way of thanking them for everything they had done for him. After breakfast, he took a quick shower and changed into his school uniform. The Kuoh Academy uniform consisted of a long-sleeved white shirt with a black button-down vest, dark gray pants, and a red tie that gave the outfit an elegant touch. The uniform looked formal, but also had a modern feel. It was a symbol of the Academy's prestige, known as the most prestigious in the city and one of the best in the region. Thanks to the kindness of the family that had taken him in, Hideki had managed to enroll in the academy, as they helped him with all the necessary paperwork. It hadn't been easy, especially since he had no record of anything in this world. He didn't exist in government systems, nor did he have any documents proving his identity. However, the couple had moved heaven and earth to help him, and he didn't want to be a burden to them. For that reason, Hideki had studied hard to earn a scholarship to the prestigious academy. He knew he couldn't continue to rely on them, and the scholarship gave him the opportunity to support himself and return the favor. Fortunately, he hadn't had any problems with this after all. Hideki had always been a very disciplined boy, both in his training and his studies. After a long and tiring day at the academy, Hideki returned to the teppanyaki restaurant. The door clinked softly as it opened, and he was greeted by the warm aroma of freshly prepared food and the soft laughter coming from the kitchen, where the sound of the griddle and the sizzling of ingredients mingled in a cozy atmosphere. "Hideki!" exclaimed Kaori, the restaurant owner, with a smile that felt like a beacon in the darkness. Her enthusiasm was a brief light in the tunnel of her day. "Your just-in-time customers are already asking for you." Hideki gave her a tired, forced smile, which barely concealed his fatigue and pent-up sadness. "Sorry I'm late, Kaori-san. I'll go change and then I'll take care of the cooking." Takashi, Kaori's husband, patted him on the shoulder as he passed. "Don't worry, kid. We know the academy isn't easy, but you always do a great job here." "Wait, Hideki-san!" A child's voice called from the hallway. Little Hiro, Kaori and Takashi's son, ran toward him with an excited expression that contrasted sharply with Hideki's mood. Hideki widened his smile to a more genuine one, bending down to greet the boy. "Hey, Hiro! How was your day?" "Great!" the boy exclaimed, proudly waving a drawing. "I made this one for you at school." Hideki picked up the drawing, which showed a version of himself wearing a superhero cape. His smile became a little more genuine, though the sadness remained. "Wow, that's amazing. Thanks, Hiro. I'm going to put it in my room." Kaori approached, laughing with a warmth that seemed insufficient to soothe Hideki's sadness. "Hiro couldn't stop talking about you all day. I think he's made you his personal hero. He even says you're like an older brother to him." Hideki smiled, touched, but also with a hint of melancholy. "Really, Hiro? I'm glad you think so." The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. You're like a big brother to me, Hideki-san." Hideki smiled, feeling a mixture of gratitude and pain. "Well, I'll try to live up to that title." The family's efforts to make him feel good were comforting, but the feeling of isolation lingered in his chest. After changing into his chef's uniform and leaving the drawing in his room, he headed to the kitchen, where he began preparing the evening's orders on the teppanyaki grill, the distinctive sound of cooking in full view of the customers creating a vibrant atmosphere. As he chopped vegetables quickly and precisely, Hideki couldn't help but reflect on the life he'd left behind and how his cooking skills, acquired out of necessity, now became a means to navigate his existence in this new world. He thought of his grandfather, Inoki, and how he used to stress the importance of being self-sufficient. The sadness of not being able to share his accomplishments with him was overwhelming. "You're a great chef, Hideki," Kaori said, approaching the teppanyaki grill. "Customers always rave about your dishes. I don't know what we'd do without you." Hideki smiled again, but the fatigue in his eyes was evident. "Thank you, Kaori-san. I actually like cooking. I learned to help my grandfather. I guess I owe my grandfather a lot for that." Kaori watched him for a moment, as if she could sense the sadness behind his smile, but decided not to push him. Well, you have a natural talent. We're very grateful to have you here, Hideki. Hideki nodded silently, continuing his work with a renewed energy that only masked the underlying pain. Although he had at least found a place where he could belong, the emptiness in his heart remained, a constant reminder of what he had lost and the dreams he still yearned to achieve. The Kuoh Academy bell rang, signaling the end of morning recess. The students hurried back to their classrooms, and Hideki walked at a slow pace, lost in thought. The school uniform, though elegant, failed to hide the vertical scar near his right eye, a mark from the battles he had faced in his previous world. Often, curious glances and unspoken questions from his classmates were directed toward that scar, but Hideki had learned to ignore them over time. In the hallways, most of the students seemed absorbed in their own affairs, gossiping and laughing in groups. Hideki, at 178 centimeters tall, stood out somewhat from the crowd, but his solitary presence and reserved demeanor made him seem even more isolated. He wasn't as handsome as Kibayudo, who always attracted attention with his impeccable appearance, but Hideki had his own kind of appeal. As he walked toward his classroom, a group of first-year students approached him. Among them, several girls in immaculate uniforms and shy smiles looked at him curiously. "Hey, Hideki-senpai," said one of the girls, a young woman with short brown hair, "can you help us with our math homework? We don't quite understand the teacher's explanation." Another girl, with blonde braids, nodded. "Yes, we'd really appreciate it. We've heard you're very good at this." Hideki stopped in his tracks and smiled kindly. Although he was a solitary student, he was always willing to help those in need. "Sure, what don't you understand?" The group gathered around him, and Hideki leaned over to look at their notebooks. As he patiently explained the concepts, he noticed the girls looking at each other, clearly impressed by his kind demeanor and ability to explain things clearly. Although he didn't seek attention, it was clear his efforts didn't go unnoticed. "Thank you, Hideki-kun," one of the girls said with a smile. "You're a real lifesaver." "No problem," Hideki replied with a genuine smile. "We all need a little help from time to time." With their homework cleared, the group of girls said their goodbyes and headed to their respective classrooms, casting admiring glances at Hideki. He continued on his way to the classroom, feeling the weight of his emotional situation. Sometimes he wondered what his life would be like if he could return to his own world, but he knew he had to move on and adapt. Later, in physical education class, Hideki met the first-year students in the gym. The teacher had decided to organize a team exercise to encourage collaboration. Hideki, as a second-year student, was mixed in with the first-year students to facilitate teamwork. Among the first-year students, Hideki spotted Kaneko Tuju, a classmate he'd interacted with before. Kaneko was observing the other students with a serene expression, but her gaze fell on Hideki as he prepared for the exercise. Kaneko approached Hideki with soft steps and a slight smile. "Hello, Hideki-senpai," she said in a calm voice. "How has your day been so far?" Hideki was surprised to see her approaching and smiled at her. "Hello, Kaneko." It was nothing out of the ordinary. Hideki called her by name at her request. Kaneko nodded and watched as Hideki pulled a small bag from his backpack. From it, he took out a homemade cookie and offered it to Kaneko. "Here, a cookie for you," Hideki said. "I know how much you like sweets and desserts." Kaneko accepted the cookie with a surprised and grateful expression. "Thank you, Hideki-senpai. You didn't have to do this, but I really appreciate it. It was a kind gesture of you." "It's nothing," Hideki replied with a smile. "I like to share what I have with friends." Kaneko nodded in understanding. "That's very kind of you." With a friendly smile, Kaneko joined her team for the exercise, and Hideki joined the group as well. Pii, the sound of the teacher's whistle echoed throughout the field. "Well, guys, today we'll have mixed volleyball matches, as we agreed last week. Form your teams and get ready to play," the teacher announced enthusiastically. Physical education class was one of the most anticipated activities of the day, especially since the mixed volleyball match promised friendly and fun competition. The teams, made up of students from different grades, generated an atmosphere of camaraderie that everyone seemed to enjoy. Hideki found himself on a team composed of second and first-year students. He was ready to play and enjoy the match, unfazed by the pressure of being in the spotlight. On the other hand, The opposing team was led by Kaneko, and Hideki couldn't help but notice that she was accompanied by some of her first and second year teammates. The match began with great enthusiasm, and it quickly became clear that Hideki's physical ability stood out among the other players. His agility and strength were remarkable, and although he didn't seek out the spotlight, his performance couldn't help but attract attention. Kaneko, despite her size, surprised everyone with her great athletic ability. She moved with a precision and speed that made the game more challenging for Hideki's team. However, Hideki was unintimidated and counterattacked skillfully. In one of the key moments of the match, Hideki leaped to take a shot, and his height and strength made him stand out even more. The ball flew over the net with impressive speed, and the opposing team barely had time to react. The girls on Hideki's team cheered, and Hideki gave them a confident smile. From the stands, several students watched the match with interest. The girls, in particular, seemed impressed by Hideki's physical abilities. His movements were precise and full of energy, and every action he performed on the court drew admiring glances. After a dynamic exchange of plays, the match reached a critical moment. Kaneko, with her ability to anticipate moves, managed to block a powerful attack from Hideki, causing the crowd to erupt in cheers and exclamations. Despite Kaneko's efforts, Hideki quickly recovered and helped his team maintain the lead. Finally, the referee's whistle signaled the end of the match. Hideki's team won by a narrow margin, and both teams shook hands in a sign of respect and camaraderie. Hideki approached Kaneko, who was wearing a look of concentration and exhaustion. "You're impressive, Kaneko," Hideki commented with a smile as he approached her. "You played really well. I still can't believe how high you can jump." Hideki was genuinely surprised by Kaneko's abilities. Kaneko smiled back with a slight nod. "Thank you, Hideki-senpai. You played well too. It was a good challenge." "Thank you very much, Kaneko," Hideki replied. As the teams dispersed, Hideki noticed some students still talking about the game and his performance. Although he wasn't interested in being the center of attention, he couldn't help but feel a little satisfied at having contributed to the general enthusiasm. With the game over, Hideki and Kaneko headed to the showers, happy with the good energy of the game and the opportunity to share a sporting experience. Despite the differences between their worlds, moments like these reminded him that he could still find connection and camaraderie in his new surroundings. After the exciting volleyball match, Hideki headed to the boys' locker room to change. The energy from the game was still coursing through his body, and although he was tired, he felt a sense of satisfaction he couldn't ignore. He walked into the locker room with the same calmness he displayed on the court, unaware that his classmates would be paying attention to his presence. The locker room was filled with lively conversation and laughter from the students changing after the game. Hideki headed to an empty bench and began undressing, aware of the heat and humidity in the air. As he changed, several of the team's mostly first years, who had been watching and talking about the game, began to murmur among themselves. One of the boys, with his hair in disarray and a curious expression, commented to the group, "Have you seen Hideki-senpai's physique? It's impressive. You can tell he trains hard." Another classmate, who was drying his hair with a towel, nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, and not only that. The scars on his body, that must be from some epic story or something." However, among the boys who didn't know Hideki well, some looked on with some unease. "What about those scars?" one of them said nervously. "Don't you think he's a little scary? He looks like he's been a juvenile delinquent or something." Another boy, who was also watching, nodded with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Yeah, I don't know, those scars give him a pretty intimidating look." But then another student who knew Hideki better chimed in. "It can't be possible. Hideki-senpai is very kind. He's helped me on several occasions, even when he didn't have to. I don't think he's pretending or that he's like the others think." The boy who had raised the concern raised an eyebrow. "Really? Are you sure? Maybe he's just putting on an act to hide his true nature." The student defending Hideki shook his head. "I don't think so. I've seen how he treats others. He's a genuinely good person, despite those scars. I think it's just a tough life story, but it doesn't mean he's a bad person." Hearing these comments, Hideki realized he was being watched and turned to them with a friendly smile, showing no discomfort at all at the attention. "Oh, those scars are from an accident I had while trying to save someone. It was a rather messy situation, but thankfully everything turned out all right," he explained with a mixture of sincerity and vagueness. "Nothing to worry about." One of the boys, who was particularly interested, leaned forward to take a closer look. "He must have had a pretty tough life. Although, really, that makes him seem more impressive, you know?" Hideki shrugged and put on the clothes he'd brought for after the game. "I've only had to face a few obstacles in my life. But the important thing is to keep moving forward." The boys continued talking among themselves, some with a mixture of respect and admiration, while Hideki finished dressing. Although he had noticed the stares and comments, he didn't let them affect him. Instead, he focused on getting ready to return to the restaurant and work his shift. As his teammates continued to chat about the match and Hideki's abilities, he headed toward the locker room exit, feeling a mixture of satisfaction at his good performance in the match and peace of mind at maintaining his focus on what was to come. The Occult Club was in full swing when Kaneko entered the room. Rias and Aquino were chatting while reviewing some old documents and books. The atmosphere of the place was always permeated with mystery, accentuated by the relics and artifacts decorating the room, making the atmosphere feel full of secrets to be discovered. Kaneko approached quietly, still thinking about her recent interaction with Hideki. As she settled into a nearby armchair, Aquino quickly noticed her presence with her characteristic playful tone. Era, Kaneko-kun, you seem very interested in Saidakan lately," Aquino commented with a mischievous smile. "Have you found more than just a classmate?" Kaneko blushed slightly, a barely perceptible expression on her normally imperturbable face. "It's not like that, Aquino. We've just gotten along," she replied, trying to maintain her usual calm. Rias, who had been watching the conversation curiously, frowned slightly before leaning forward. "Saidakan, I'm not familiar with him. Could you tell me more about this boy?" Aquino let out a small laugh, enjoying the situation. "Well, Hideki Saidakan has started to attract some attention lately. Although he's not the most famous student at Kuoh Academy, his physical ability and kind attitude have made him stand out. He's shown impressive performance in sports, and his dedication to school is remarkable. He even has a scholarship. Some are already calling him the hero of the academy for his exemplary character." Rias listened with interest, but her mind focused on something else. "Kaneko, have you noticed anything strange about him? Any traces of supernatural energy, or a connection to the sacred gears?" Kaneko shook her head. "No, Rias Butchu. I don't sense any supernatural energy from him. His presence is a little different from other humans, but he doesn't seem to have any special powers. Maybe it's just my imagination influenced by how kind he's been to me," she muttered to herself, though Aquino managed to catch her last words. "Different how?" Aquino asked with a curious smile, while Kaneko looked away. "It has a strange doggy smell," Kaneko added, muttering under her breath. However, Aquino heard her perfectly, causing her smile to widen. "Oh, are you afraid that Saidakan likes dogs more than cats?" Aquino teased, causing Kaneko to blush even more. "It's not that," Kaneko quickly retorted, visibly embarrassed. "The smell I'm smelling is more like that of an Inuyokai, but I can tell he's human. Maybe I'm just confused, and he has a pet dog." Rias frowned thoughtfully. "That's interesting. While there's no obvious supernatural energy about him, his presence and the Inuyokai scent you mentioned could suggest some connection to supernatural creatures. Perhaps Hideki has some unknown connection to these beings, or he could even be related to some sort of special magic or bloodline." Aquino, with her usual curiosity, joined the conversation. "That sounds plausible. Inuyokai are known for having a particular influence on their surroundings. If Hideki has some connection with them, that could explain why you sense something different about him." Aquino smiled mischievously. "Perhaps it would be helpful to ask Hideki directly if he has any pets, especially dogs. Sometimes, a simple conversation can clear up any doubts." Rias nodded, still considering the possibilities. "That's a good idea. While we can't detect any supernatural energy in him for now, it's important to keep an eye out for any details that may emerge. Appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the subtlest clues can reveal more than we imagine." Hideki walked through the city after a long day, thoughts heavy on his mind. Despite the warmth of the Nishimiya family and the connection he'd begun to forge with Kaneko, a shadow seemed to follow him every step. Something was missing. Something he couldn't ignore. As he passed a small donut shop, he stopped. The sweet aroma drew him in, but it was more than that drove him inside. It was nostalgia, that memory of days gone by in his old world, when moments as simple as buying a donut could bring him some happiness. He went in, ordered a few, and walked out with a bag in his hand, as if clinging to that small illusion of normalcy. He sat down on a nearby bench, a forced smile adorning his face. He opened the bag with an excitement he tried to mimic, seeking solace in the familiar smell of donuts. This smells delicious," he exclaimed, forcing enthusiasm. He picked up a donut and held it to his nose, smiling in a way that hid his true feelings. "What a heavenly scent it smells, like honey buns." "No more words," he said with a big smile before taking a bite. "This is amazing. It's so delicious. It's so good to be alive," he said, trying to convince himself as he took a bite. He knew that even though he was grateful to be alive, the sweet taste couldn't fill the emptiness in him. But as he chewed, the sweet taste couldn't fill the emptiness he felt. Around him, the world kept spinning. Children ran by, giggling excitedly because their mother had promised them a toy. A couple walked hand in hand, sharing a light, cheerful conversation. Friends argued amidst jokes, one saying, "I know you too well, you won't." A family walked past him, the little girl laughing with contagious joy while her parents followed close behind, smiling. "Sniff delicious," he murmured, his voice choked with suppressed emotion. "They're very tasty." Her hand stilled as she spoke, and the sadness she'd been hiding in her voice became evident. Sobs began to escape her chest. The donuts she was holding fell to the floor, forgotten. "Why?" she whispered, her hands covering her face, desperately trying to hold back the tears that were now flowing uncontrollably. His mind filled with memories, which now felt more distant and painfully unattainable. He remembered how his grandfather used to wake him up every morning, his scoldings wrapped in unconditional love, and the unwavering support he provided in his darkest moments. Images of his friends, especially Shiso and Kirishima, also appeared, those who had been his refuge in difficult times. The good times shared, back when the weight of becoming a hero hadn't yet weighed him down, now felt like distant echoes, filled with a nostalgia that amplified his sadness. However, with those happy memories also came the overwhelming weight of his current situation. He had lost what used to give his life meaning. His family, his friends, his dream of being a hero, everything now seemed so distant, so out of reach, that the contrast between his past and present only accentuated his pain. In that moment, surrounded by people who lived their lives as if nothing had changed, Hideki felt the true weight of his loneliness. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to break down. The tears he had held back for so long fell unchecked. The week went by as normally as Hideki's life. He spent his time helping Hiro with his chores and offering as much support as he could around the restaurant. Initially, the restaurant was quite ordinary, with the kitchen in the back, and customers could only see the chef's back. However, after Hideki joined the team, Takeshi, impressed by Hideki's culinary skills, had an innovative idea. He decided to transform the restaurant into a teppanyaki-style establishment. At a teppanyaki restaurant, the chef cooks ingredients directly in front of customers on a hot iron griddle. This style not only offers a unique culinary experience but also becomes an entertaining spectacle, with the chef performing eye-catching tricks and techniques, including utensil juggling and fire demonstrations. Hideki's skill with the griddle and his dynamic cooking style added a new level of excitement and sophistication to the restaurant, attracting more customers and providing a memorable experience for all. The evening was in full swing at the teppanyaki restaurant. The hot iron griddle in the center of the room emitted a warm glow and a soft crackle as Hideki skillfully moved around it. Customers gathered around the griddle, expectant and excited for the spectacle that was about to begin. Hideki, with a confident smile on his face, began preparing the ingredients. First, he carefully placed a layer of oil on the hot griddle, the subtle sound of sizzling oil filling the air. Then, he took a pair of sharp knives and began slicing vegetables and meat with a skill that seemed almost artistic. Each movement was precise and elegant, and the rhythm he worked in seemed choreographed. "Get ready for the show," Hideki announced excitedly, tossing the cut vegetables into the air before dropping them onto the grill. The vegetables began to pop and sizzle, creating a melody of sounds that caught everyone's attention. Customers clapped and cheered as Hideki continued his routine. With a nimble flick of his wrist, he tossed the pieces of meat into the air, deftly flipping and turning them before placing them back on the grill. His skill in manipulating the utensils and ingredients while maintaining a lively conversation with the customers added a personal touch to the show. "Anyone want to see a special trick?" Hideki asked with a mischievous grin. The excited customers nodded enthusiastically. Hideki grabbed a pair of kitchen utensils and began juggling them. He twirled the utensils in the air, capturing them with perfect timing. Then, he performed a little flame maneuver, adding a touch of drama to the show. People gasped as they watched the fire dance with controlled skill. Finally, Hideki began plating the food with impeccable presentation. As he did so, he beamed at the customers and answered their comments and questions about the ingredients and techniques used. The personal interaction and culinary spectacle made the experience unforgettable for everyone present. When the last dish was ready, Hideki gave a final bow to the audience, receiving a standing ovation. The customers left satisfied, and the restaurant returned to its usual tranquility. Kaori and Takeshi, watching from a corner, approached Hideki with proud smiles. "That was an impressive sight, Hideki," Kaori said, clearly excited. "You have a natural talent for this," Takeshi added. "The restaurant has never been so popular." At that moment, a friend of Takeshi, who was sitting at a nearby table, couldn't resist making a joking comment. "Hey, Takeshi, looks like you found a chef who makes your food taste like beginner's food," he said with a mocking laugh. "I think it's time you passed the apron to Hideki." Takeshi laughed good-naturedly, nudging his friend lightly. "Come on, don't be so harsh." Hideki really took this to the next level. Hideki laughed and raised a hand in thanks. "Thanks, but I'm not as good as you say. I just try to do my best." The night concluded with a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction in the air. Although Hideki knew there was still much to learn and many challenges ahead, moments like this reminded him that, despite being in a different world, he had found a place where he could truly shine. Monday arrived, and Hideki was relieved after a busy weekend at the restaurant, which had gained a lot of popularity in a short time. Today, since it was Monday, he had the day off from the restaurant, and Mr. Takeshi would be in charge of running the restaurant. As he left the academy, Hideki sighed contentedly. The day had been normal, like any other, and while he missed the excitement and uncertainty of his previous world, with its constant villain attacks, he was also glad that people in this world didn't have to worry about such threats. Feeling at ease, he began to walk aimlessly, enjoying the freedom of a day off and the opportunity to explore and relax in his new surroundings. Hideki strolled through the park, enjoying the fresh air and the brief respite from his hectic daily routine. The sun was beginning to set over the horizon, tinting the sky with warm, golden hues. He decided to head to a more secluded part of the park, looking for a quiet corner where he could sit and relax. Suddenly, a soft noise caught his attention. Turning his head, Hideki found himself facing a creature that looked like something out of a fairy tale, a feline with pointy ears and a long tail, covered in white fur flecked with black spots. The creature, with its mystical appearance, seemed clearly out of the ordinary. Upon noticing Hideki's presence, the Bakaniko bristled, baring its sharp teeth and emitting a low, threatening sound. Hideki stopped in his tracks, feeling a chill run down his spine. His instincts warned him not to get too close, but his fascination with the creature kept him motionless. What are you?" Hideki murmured, astonished. Although he was familiar with many mythological creatures, he had never imagined encountering one in reality. The momentary surprise made him forget his fear. The Bakaniko, noticing that Hideki showed no signs of aggression, seemed to calm down slightly, although she still displayed a cautious attitude. Hideki decided to act carefully so as not to provoke her. He remembered his grandfather's lessons on how to treat animals and tried to apply those principles. "I'm going to take a step back," Hideki said, trying to sound calm. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to understand what's going on." As he slowly backed away, Hideki tried to make gentle movements, avoiding any gestures that could be interpreted as a threat. Fortunately, the Bakeneko seemed to accept his peaceful attitude, and the threatening sound began to diminish. In an attempt to gain the Bakeneko's trust, Hideki slowly crouched down and extended a hand, maintaining a non-threatening posture. Although he didn't know if the creature would understand the gesture, he hoped to at least convey his lack of hostile intentions. Suddenly, Hideki heard hurried footsteps approaching. He looked toward the source of the sound and saw a brown-haired girl running toward him with a worried expression on her face. "Wait!" the girl exclaimed, seeing the situation. She stood between Hideki and the Bakeneko. "Don't come any closer." The Bakeneko, sensing the sudden movement, grew even more alarmed and, in an act of defense, launched a ferocious attack. With a swift movement of its paw, it tore through the air with its sharp claws and struck Hideki before he could react. The impact threw Hideki into the air, and a deep claw wound formed on his left arm, causing sharp pain. Hideki fell to the ground, his left arm bloodied, his face a look of stunned astonishment. The Bakeneko, seeing the damage he had caused, quickly retreated, vanishing into the bushes with surprising speed. Abe rushed over to Hideki, his face pale and worried. "You're hurt. Let me help you." Despite the stabbing pain and the shock of the attack, Hideki remained surprisingly alert, thanks to his training and the grueling trials he'd faced back home. The wound on his left arm was deep and painful, and he was certain he'd broken his arm and must have at least 3 broken ribs. The combination of pain and blood loss made him constantly dizzy, but the determination and willpower he'd developed over the years kept him alert. He forced himself to sit up with difficulty, leaning against the trunk of a nearby tree to steady himself. His vision blurred with pain and blood loss, but he didn't allow himself to collapse. Hideki breathed deeply, trying to ignore the dizzy feeling that was spinning in his head. The approaching girl's voice became a distant murmur, distorted by pain and vertigo. However, Hideki couldn't allow himself to lose consciousness. His mind remained active, assessing the situation and searching for a way to overcome this new challenge. With a steadfast expression despite the pain, Hideki focused on controlling his breathing and staying awake. He knew giving up wasn't an option, especially after having faced so many difficulties in his life. Although the wound was causing him intense pain, he clung to his determination to overcome any obstacle that came his way. The girl finally reached him and began to speak urgently, but Hideki was too focused on trying to stay conscious to hear clearly. He made an effort to look up at her, his eyes showing a mixture of pain and determination. With a trembling but determined voice, Hideki gave her a look that spoke volumes he couldn't put into words. Although the situation was dire, his resilience gave him the strength to face this challenge. He knew he had to endure until he received the help he needed. The girl, who turned out to be Abe, knelt beside Hideki with a look of deep concern. Her eyes fell on Hideki's bleeding wound and the pain clearly visible on his face. Without wasting any time, she began to assess the seriousness of the situation. "No, don't move!" Abe exclaimed urgently. "I'm going to help you." Despite the chaos and anguish in her voice, Abe moved with surprising calm under the pressure. Realizing she didn't have a first aid kit, she felt a little lost, but her determination didn't waver. "What can I do?" she asked herself, trying to keep her voice calm as she searched through her backpack. Hideki, despite the overwhelming pain, managed to remain conscious and alert. He looked at Abe and, with difficulty, managed to utter a few words. "My belt," Hideki said, his voice choked. "Use it, make a tourniquet. I need you to stop the bleeding." Abe, understanding the gravity of the situation, quickly removed Hideki's belt. She placed it around the injured arm, tightening it as tightly as possible to stop the flow of blood. "I'm sorry, this must hurt," Abe murmured as she carefully adjusted the belt. "I'll do everything I can to make sure you're okay." As she applied the tourniquet, Abe looked at the Bakeneko, who was now observing the scene from a safe distance. The creature seemed less threatening, although it was still attentive to what was happening. At that moment, the Bakeneko, who had been observing the scene from a safe distance, began to relax, noticing the aura of kindness in both humans. The creature approached with cautious movements, its gaze fixed on Hideki's wound. With a soft snore, the Bakeneko began to lick Hideki's wound with its warm, moist tongue. As the Bakeneko licked, Hideki felt unexpected relief in his arm. The scratches began to heal, and the pain from the wound was noticeably reduced. However, the broken bones still hadn't healed, and the lingering pain reminded Hideki that the situation wasn't yet completely resolved. Abe watched in awe as the Bakeneko used its healing ability. The transformation in Hideki's wound was stunning, and her heart filled with hope that the situation was improving. She approached Hideki with a relieved expression, relieved that at least the Bakeneko was helping. I'm so sorry, Abe said in a shaky voice, touching Hideki's arm gently. I didn't know the Bakeneko would do something like this. I hope you feel a little better. Hideki, though still in pain, looked at Abe with gratitude. Thank you. Even though the pain is still there, this has helped me a lot. Hideki, still leaning against the tree with his injured arm wrapped in the belt Abe had improvised as a tourniquet, watched the Bakeneko slowly walk away. The relief of seeing the wound partially healed made him feel a mixture of gratitude and awe. Although the broken bones still hurt, he knew the Bakeneko's help had made a huge difference. With a visible effort, Hideki sat up a little and, looking towards the place where the Bakeneko had gone, said in a weakened but sincere voice, Thank you so much for your help, Hideki said softly, aware that the Bakeneko probably couldn't fully understand him, but wanting to express his gratitude anyway. Abe, hearing Hideki's words, looked around, searching for the Bakeneko, which had already disappeared into the bushes. Although he couldn't see the Bakeneko, he understood Hideki's gratitude. I'm so sorry, her voice laced with regret. If I had arrived a little sooner, this could have been avoided. I didn't know the situation had gotten so bad. I'm truly sorry I wasn't here to prevent it. Hideki, still in pain but recognizing Abe's sincere remorse, smiled comfortingly. Don't worry, Hideki replied in a softer voice. I appreciate everything you've done. Sometimes things don't go as expected, but help and concern go a long way. The important thing is that you're here now. Abe nodded, visibly relieved by Hideki's words. The two shared a moment of mutual understanding, waiting for the Bakeneko to move far enough away so Hideki could receive more help. After a few minutes, Hideki, with Abe's help, stood up and began walking slowly toward the hospital. Although the pain in his arm and ribs was considerable, Abe's help and the relief that his superficial wound had healed gave him a little strength. Abe carefully assisted him, making sure he didn't stumble or hurt himself further. By the way, what's your name? Hideki asked, trying to start a conversation to distract himself from the pain and get to know his savior better. Abe, smiling slightly despite the situation, replied, My name is Kyom Abe. I live near here and I'm a student at Kuoh Academy, just like you. I also have a job that involves keeping supernatural creatures in check so they don't attack humans. I was walking through the park when I saw the commotion and ran over to see if I could help. Hideki nodded, a look of gratitude on his face, omitting the fact that she was in charge of those creatures. At least for the moment he decided to omit it. Thank you for coming at just the right time, Kyom. My name is Hideki Saito. I've been in this city for a while, and to tell you the truth, I'm still getting used to everything here. Kyom nodded in understanding. I understand. It must be difficult adjusting to a new place, especially with everything you've been through today. If you need help finding your way around or anything, don't hesitate to ask. Hideki smiled, feeling a little more relieved by Kyom's kindness. I really appreciate it. It's nice to know there are people willing to help. And by the way, I owe you one. It's not something I can easily repay, but I promise to do it. Kyom laughed softly. Don't worry about it. I'm just glad to know you're okay. My job is to keep humans safe from supernatural threats, but it's comforting to know that, from time to time, I can also help in a more direct way. Let's go to the hospital and make sure you're properly cared for. After that, if you'd like, we could have some coffee and talk some more. Hideki nodded with a smile. That sounds good. Thanks, Kyom. I'm glad I found someone like you today. As they continued their walk to the hospital, Hideki and Kyom chatted about trivial matters, discovering they had more in common than they expected. The conversation helped Hideki take his mind off his pain and start to feel a little more comfortable in his new surroundings. Hideki returned to the Nishimiya restaurant late at night, having spent several hours at the hospital with Kyom Abe. The night had been long and tiring, but at least his arm was in a cast, and he and Abe had agreed to discuss the supernatural world further another time. He was grateful to have found someone like Kyom, who had helped him cope and shown him a glimmer of normalcy on such a difficult day. When he entered the restaurant kitchen, the Nishimiya family was waiting, visibly concerned by his late arrival and his condition. His mother, a gentle-looking woman, quickly approached with a worried expression on her face. Hiro, her son, stood beside her, his gaze a mixture of distress and curiosity in his eyes. "Hideki, please tell us what happened," the mother said in a trembling voice as she examined the cast on Hideki's arm. Hideki tried to smile to reassure them, even though the pain was still noticeable. "It was just an accident. I fell and ended up with a broken arm. I already went to the hospital. They'd put my arm in a cast and told me I just need a little time to recover. I'm fine, really." Hiro's father, with an expression of concern mixed with relief, approached as well. "Are you sure you're okay? Do you need anything else?" Hideki nodded, grateful for her concern. "I'm fine, really. I just need to rest a little. The hospital gave me some recommendations and I'm going to follow them. Thank you for your concern, it means a lot to me." Hiro, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. "How did you hurt yourself?" Hideki decided to omit the details about the Bakeniko and only mentioned what seemed most plausible. "I tripped over something while walking in the park. It was a silly accident, nothing serious." Hiro's mother nodded, understanding the situation. "Well, at least you're in good hands now. If you need anything, don't hesitate to let us know. And please take care of yourself." Hideki smiled, feeling comforted by her warmth and support. "I will. Thank you all for your concern. Tomorrow, after I rest a bit, I'll tell you more about what happened, but for now I just want to rest." With a final gesture of gratitude to the Nishimiya family, Hideki headed to his room. Although he was tired and sore, he was relieved to have a place where he could be welcomed and cared for. The night progressed with the promise of a new day, and Hideki prepared to face the future, both in his recovery and in discovering the new realities that his life in this world had presented him. Kaori Nishimiya and her husband, Takeshi Nishimiya, remained awake despite the late hour. Hideki had fallen asleep in his bed the moment he touched the mattress, and Hiro had already been sent to his room to sleep. Takeshi, aware that Hideki's condition was unusual, deduced that the young man's injuries were related to something more than a simple accident. "So, what happened to Hideki?" Takeshi asked, his eyes fixed on Kaori, his expression revealing his growing concern. Kaori, knowing that Takeshi already had his own assumptions, began to speak. However, before explaining, she paused and exhaled calmly. Finally, her gaze turned to Takeshi with a seriousness only he could interpret. "I could smell the scent of a Bakeniko on Hideki," Kaori said, her voice deep and determined. "It's not something you can easily smell unless you have a special sensitivity like I do. The fact that he was attacked by a creature like that is alarming." Kaori could smell Hideki's Bakeniko due to her Inu-yokai nature, which gave her heightened senses. Although Takeshi was human, the love they shared had led Kaori to ask permission to live in the human world with her family. Takeshi looked at her closely. Although he was already aware that his wife was an Inu-yokai and possessed abilities to detect the supernatural, the revelation that she had identified a Bakeniko in Hideki made him realize the gravity of the situation. His expression grew graver as he processed the information. Takeshi frowned, worried. That would explain the state he came back in. "But I don't understand how Hideki came to encounter a Bakeniko? I thought these beings usually stay away from humans." Kaori nodded, looking down at the ground as she considered how to approach the situation. "It's true, Bakeniko usually avoid humans, but sometimes they can appear in unexpected places. It's possible Hideki was in the wrong place at the wrong time. My ability to detect these creatures is a bit more refined due to my Inu-yokai nature, so I can say with certainty that he was attacked by one." Takeshi nodded, his concern only partly assuaged. "What worries me is how to handle this situation without causing alarm. We don't want Hideki getting embroiled in any more supernatural-related trouble." Kaori approached her husband and took his hand. "Yes, we need to protect him and make sure he's okay. Perhaps we should talk to him about what happened, but be careful not to alarm him. It would also be wise to do more research on how to handle encounters with creatures like the Bakeniko." Takashi nodded, determined to protect Hideki from any further danger. Okay. Let's do this the right way. The important thing is that Hideki recovers well and that we can keep him safe. They both headed off to their respective tasks, determined to ensure Hideki was protected and not left to face the challenges the supernatural world had in store for him alone. The next day at the academy, Hideki arrived with his arm in a cast. Although he had managed to manage the pain, his appearance indicated the seriousness of his injuries. The doctors had recommended rest, and for his broken ribs, they had only prescribed painkillers and advised him to avoid sudden movements. As he walked down the hallway, Hideki ran into Kaneko, who looked at him with concern upon noticing the cast on his arm. She quickly approached, stopping right in front of him. "What happened to you, Hideki-senpai?" Kaneko asked, her voice filled with curiosity and concern. Hideki, realizing that Kaneko had noticed his condition, tried to maintain a calm expression. Although he wasn't entirely sure how much Kaneko knew about the supernatural, he decided not to mention anything about it. "It was an accident at the park," Hideki said with a forced smile. "I fell while walking and hurt myself." "It's nothing serious." Kaneko frowned, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. She had clearly been able to notice the scent of bakeneko on Hideki's body, but her concern was still evident. She seemed to be evaluating the veracity of Hideki's words, but decided not to press further. "I hope you get better soon," Kaneko said, softening her expression. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to let me know." Hideki nodded, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Kaneko. I'll keep that in mind." As Kaneko walked away, Hideki breathed a sigh of relief. He knew Kaneko might have noticed something odd in his explanation, but he was determined to keep the incident with the bakeneko a secret. His experience with the bakeneko had been a harsh lesson and a confirmation that the world was full of unexpected surprises, but also a reminder that he should be cautious with the information he shared. The day went by normally. During class, several girls approached Hideki to ask him about his cast on his arm. He simply repeated the same lie, that he had fallen while walking, trying to keep the story as simple as possible. When classes ended, Hideki was in the hallway, finishing gathering his things, when he noticed Kaiomaid moving purposefully among the students. She seemed to be looking for him, and when their eyes met, Kaiyom approached with a smile. "Saito-san." Kaiyom greeted, her tone cheerful but with a hint of concern. "It's good to see you. Can we talk for a moment?" Hideki was surprised to see her and nodded, following her. "Sure, what's up?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Kaiyom looked at him with a mixture of seriousness and curiosity. "I wanted to make sure you were okay after last night," he said. "How are you feeling?" Hideki, relieved to see her genuine concern, nodded. "I'm fine, thank you. I just have some minor discomfort, but nothing serious." Kaiyom nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "I'm glad to hear that. I also wanted to talk to you about what happened last night. Do you have a moment to explain a few things?" Intrigued, Hideki replied. "Yes, of course. I'm willing to listen. Where would you prefer to talk?" Kaiyom smiled at him. "We can go somewhere quieter. There's a lot to explain, and I think it's best to do it in a more relaxed environment." The two of them headed to a secluded corner of the academy, away from the hustle and bustle of the students. Once in the quiet spot, Kaiyom began to talk about the supernatural world, capturing Hideki's attention with the seriousness and depth of her words. Hideki met with Kaiyom in a quiet corner of the academy. The concern and curiosity on his face reflected the seriousness of the topic he was about to discuss. Kaiyom sat down on a bench and had Hideki join her. "Well, Saito-san," Kaiyom began in a calm tone, "I want to explain a few things to you about the supernatural world. First of all, you should know that there are a large number of creatures and beings that coexist with us in this world, although they are not always visible to most people." Hideki looked at her closely, already expecting an explanation of this kind for what had happened yesterday with the bakeneko. "So what happened yesterday was definitely a supernatural creature, right?" Hideki asked, trying to process the information. "Exactly," Kaiyom confirmed. "What you saw yesterday was a bakeneko. They are beings from Japanese folklore with special abilities. In general, there are a wide variety of supernatural entities, from spirits to magical beings with different powers and behaviors." "And you, what are you doing in this world?" Hideki asked, trying to understand Kyome's role in all of this. Kyome smiled slightly, showing a mixture of pride and seriousness. My family has been taming supernatural creatures for a long time. My parents travel a lot, so I usually make sure that supernatural creatures don't get too close to humans in this city, to avoid things like what happened yesterday. Hideki nodded slowly, beginning to grasp the magnitude of what Kyome was saying. I understand. So, there are more people like you who deal with this. Yes, there are others like me, Kyome replied. Though they aren't always visible, or act the same way. The reality is that the supernatural world is far more complex than meets the eye. So what do I do in all this? Hideki asked, feeling a little lost but interested. Sometimes people like you cross paths with the supernatural without even realizing it, Kyome explained seriously. What happened to you with the Bakaniko isn't something that happens every day, which is why I feel you need to know what's going on. It's critical that you have a basic understanding of these creatures so you're prepared should you face something similar in the future. Even though what happened yesterday was an accident, you're already in this world, and for one reason or another, you're likely to find yourself involved again. Hideki nodded, acknowledging the usefulness of the information. Although he still had many questions, at least now he knew he wasn't alone in his knowledge of the supernatural world. Thanks for the explanation, Kyome-senpai, Hideki said, showing his gratitude. I appreciate you telling me all this. You're welcome, Saito-san, Kyome replied. If you ever need more information or help, don't hesitate to find me. Hideki, still processing what he had just heard, felt a key question forming in his mind. If supernatural creatures like the Bakaniko existed, what else could there be in this mysterious world? Kyome-senpai, does this mean magic is real too? Are there people who can use it, like in the stories? He asked, his tone filled with curiosity, uncertainty, and a glimmer of hope. Kyome looked at him with a small smile, fully understanding Hideki's surprise. Yes, magic exists, though not like in fairy tales, he replied. There are various forms of power, from magic to techniques like senjutsu or tuki, which allow one to manipulate life energy. Some people are born with special abilities, while others develop them through training. The supernatural world is much broader than you might imagine. Hideki, after hearing Kyome's words, felt a spark of hope ignite within him. As he processed all the information about the supernatural world, one thought lingered in his mind: perhaps magic, or some of these abilities could help him return to his own world. He couldn't share this wish with anyone, but the possibility that something in this universe had the power to open a path back for him motivated him to keep going. Finally, looking up at Kyome, he decided to phrase his question carefully, concealing his true intentions. So is there any way I can learn something about this? Magic or something? He asked, with a mixture of curiosity and seriousness. I don't have any special abilities, but if I'm going to be involved in this world, maybe learning something will help me defend myself. Kyome watched him closely, sensing that his words concealed something deeper. After a moment of reflection, she nodded. It's possible, he replied. Magic is accessible to some, but there are also disciplines like senjutsu or tuki, which don't require innate magical talent, but rather control over life energy. It's not an easy path, but if you're willing to try. Hideki felt his resolve strengthen. This was another challenge, but one that now filled him with renewed hope. Although he couldn't tell anyone the true reason behind his desire to learn, he knew he would try with all his might. And you? Could you teach me some of that? I don't want to be a burden if I encounter something supernatural again, he asked seriously, hoping Kyome could be his guide in this strange world. Kyome gave a small smile before gently shaking her head. I'm afraid I couldn't teach you those things, she replied. My skills are more focused on taming and controlling supernatural creatures. It's not something that requires complex magic or advanced techniques like senjutsu or tuki. Mine is more instinctive, a connection to beasts, but I wouldn't be of much use to you in that regard. Hideki nodded, somewhat disappointed, but grateful for her honesty. I understand, he said thoughtfully. Still, I appreciate you explaining all this to me. At least I know a little more about what I'm dealing with. Kyome looked at him with a sympathetic expression. Don't worry. Even if I can't teach you, I assure you that you'll find someone who can guide you if you're determined to learn. You're not alone in this. Revelations. Kaneko started her day like any other, preparing to head to the academy and fulfill her responsibilities as part of Rias Gremery's entourage. Everything seemed routine until, upon arriving at the academy, she ran into one of the few boys she interacted with outside of Kiba, Hideki Saito. Despite his popularity, Hideki maintained a reserved attitude, which made him a bit of a mystery. He didn't have many close friends, but he always radiated energy and kindness when he spoke to someone, a trait that had caught Kaniko's attention from the start. As she watched him, Kaniko remembered the moment she first met him. It was during lunch break. As usual, she was heading to the Occult Club to eat in peace, but on her way, she ran into Hideki, lying under a tree, finishing his lunch. The boy took a cookie out of his suitcase, and Kaniko couldn't help but stop and watch him, drawn to both the cookie and the familiar scent. Using her keen sense of smell, she noticed it was homemade. Noticing Kaniko looking at him, Hideki smiled broadly and offered her the dessert without hesitation. Kaniko, somewhat surprised, accepted the gesture and sat down next to him in silence to eat her own lunch. From that moment on, something changed between them. A silent, easy bond had formed, marked by Hideki's selfless kindness and Kaniko's quiet acceptance. She pushed that memory aside as she approached Hideki. It seemed he had some sort of sixth sense for noticing her presence, as even though his back was turned, he turned around just as she approached. It was worth noting that Kaniko was surprisingly stealthy, even without trying, which made it all the more curious that Hideki always seemed to notice her arrival. However, what truly surprised her this time wasn't his keen perception, something she'd grown accustomed to, but the fact that his arm was in a cast. Kaniko quickened her pace, her gaze fixed on the cast, and approached Hideki with obvious concern. "What happened to you, Hideki-senpai?" he asked, his voice showing a mixture of curiosity and genuine concern. As she did so, a strange scent reached her senses. She sniffed almost imperceptibly, making sure not to make her curiosity obvious. As she focused her attention on the smell, she noticed something unusual: the unmistakable trace of a bakaniko. The scent was concentrated, especially on Hideki's casted arm, raising even more questions in the young demon's mind. "It was an accident at the park," Hideki said with a forced smile. It was clear that lying wasn't Hideki's strong suit. "I fell while I was walking and hurt myself." "It's nothing serious." Kaniko frowned, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. She had noticed the scent of bakaniko on Hideki's body, which worried her. Although her concern was still evident, she seemed to be evaluating the veracity of Hideki's words, but decided not to press him further. "I hope you get better soon," Kaniko said, softening her expression. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to tell me." Hideki nodded, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Kaniko. I'll keep that in mind." With one last glance, Kaniko turned away from Hideki, though her thoughts were far from calm. As she walked through the halls of the academy, her mind raced. The scent of bakaniko she'd smelled on him wasn't something she could ignore. Though Hideki tried to downplay the matter, Kaniko knew that supernatural creatures didn't casually mix with humans. With her decision made, Kaniko headed to the Occult Club room. She had to inform Rias about what she'd discovered. The possibility that Hideki had had some kind of encounter with a supernatural being deserved investigation, and Kaniko trusted Rias to know how to proceed. As she quickened her pace, she couldn't help but wonder how much more of what Hideki had said remained unsaid. Kaniko quickly arrived at the Occult Club room, where she found Rias Gremery and other club members gathered around the table. Rias was engrossed in a report, but looked up when she saw Kaniko enter. "Kaniko, what's wrong?" Rias asked, noticing the worried expression on her partner's face. "Rias Butchu, there's something I need to tell you," Kaniko said, approaching seriously. "Today at the academy, I noticed that Hideki-senpai had a bakaniko scent. Although he tried to downplay it, I'm worried that he might have been involved in an incident with a supernatural creature." Rias frowned upon hearing Hideki's name and the detail about the bakaniko. Her face turned thoughtful as she processed the information. "Hideki? Hideki Saito, right? The second-year student you and Akino talked about the other day, right?" Rias asked, remembering the young man. Kaniko nodded. "Yes, that's right. Although he said it was an accident in the park and tried to downplay the matter, the smell of bakaniko was unmistakable." Rias stood up from her chair, her expression now completely serious. This is worrying. Supernatural creatures don't usually get involved with humans for no reason. We need to find out exactly what happened and why Saito got caught up in this. What shall we do? Kaneko asked, clearly worried about her friend. First, we'll conduct an investigation to learn more about the incident, Rias replied resolutely. It might be helpful to speak with Saito directly to better understand the situation, but we must also be cautious so as not to alarm him. Additionally, we must investigate whether there are any further signs of supernatural activity in the area. Kaneko nodded, relieved that Rias was taking the situation seriously. Understood. I'm willing to help with whatever is needed. Rias gave her a reassuring smile. Thank you, Kaneko. I'll keep you informed about the next steps. In the meantime, try to keep an eye on Saito and see if you notice anything else unusual. The day had come to an end, and Hideki, after his conversation with Abe about the supernatural world, returned to the restaurant. The customers greeted him cheerfully and jokingly commented on how they hoped he would recover soon, as Takashi's cooking wasn't as tasty as theirs. After the restaurant closed, Hideki was in his room, focused on schoolwork, when he heard a knock on the door. Come in, Hideki exclaimed, knowing that the only ones who usually knocked on his room's door were the Nishimiya couple. Hiro didn't even bother knocking to enter. With that, Takashi and Kaori entered the room. Hideki, there's something very important we need to tell you, Kaori began in a serious tone. What's wrong, Kaori-san? Hideki asked, noticing that Kaori's serious tone was unusual. Takashi took a deep breath before speaking. We know this situation may seem confusing to you, and we want to be completely transparent with you. He paused briefly before continuing. The truth is, our family has abilities beyond the ordinary. Kaori is an Inuyokai, and Hiro is a half Inuyokai. I'm just human, like you. Hideki looked at Takashi and Kaori with surprise and confusion. Inuyokai? Does that mean? Kaori nodded. Yes. In this world, Inuyokai are a race of supernatural beings with dog-like characteristics. Hiro, as a half Inuyokai, has a blend of our abilities with those of humans. Hideki, trying to process the information, asked. But why are you telling me this now? We know that broken arm wasn't caused by an ordinary accident. It was the result of a Bakeniko attack. The fact that you had an encounter with a supernatural creature indicates that the world you're involved in is far more complex than you imagine, Takashi explained. Kaori took a step towards Hideki. We want you to know that we're here to help you. Our intention was never to involve you in the supernatural world, we were just trying to live a normal life. However, we knew that, given our connection to that world, something like this could happen sooner or later. Hideki, hiding his surprise, replied, This is a lot to take in. I didn't know anything about the supernatural world until the Bakeniko attacked. He ran a hand through his hair. How did you guys find out about the Bakeniko? As I mentioned, I'm part of the Inuyokai race, and I have dog-like characteristics. I was able to identify the Bakeniko's scent as soon as you got home, Kaori said. Hideki took a moment to process what he just heard. He'd already learned a bit about the supernatural world thanks to Kyome Abe, but this revelation from the family that had taken him in made everything feel more real and relatable. Kyoma-senpai already told me a little about the supernatural world today, Hideki said, looking down at his casted arm, but I didn't expect you guys to be involved in that as well. Kaori nodded, a sympathetic expression on her face. I imagine all of this must be overwhelming for you. We didn't want to keep it from you, Hideki, but we'd rather you adjusted a little more before revealing it to you. But the Bakeniko's attack changed things. Takashi took a step forward, placing a hand on Hideki's shoulder. The warmth of his gesture contrasted with the coldness of the feelings tormenting Hideki. Ever since you arrived here, we've considered you part of our family. We don't want you to face this world alone. Kaori and I will help you with whatever you need. Even if I don't have supernatural abilities, you'll always have our support. Hideki looked up at them, feeling a mixture of relief and confusion. The fact that the people who had become his refuge were now so deeply involved in the supernatural world only heightened his feeling of being lost. Thank you, he murmured, his voice thick with gratitude that seemed barely able to hide his uncertainty. I really don't know what I would have done without you. Kaori smiled warmly, but the gesture did nothing to dispel the cloud of sadness that enveloped Hideki. You don't have to thank us. But you should know that you'll be more exposed to these kinds of situations from now on. Although we didn't want to bring you into this world, it seems fate has guided you toward it. Hideki sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the situation like a stone on his chest. The Bakuniko attack, the conversation with Kyom, and now this revelation, it all seemed to happen too fast. Although a spark of hope was beginning to ignite in his mind, he wondered if he could find answers to return home amidst all this chaos. "I'm going to need your help," he said finally, with a mixture of humility and resignation. "I don't know much about this world, and I don't want to be a burden to you." "You're not a burden, Hideki," Takashi said, his tone firm but warm. "We'll always be here to support you and help you find answers. And if you decide to get more involved in this world, Kaori can teach you how to defend yourself better." Kaori nodded, her calm smile barely hiding the concern she felt for the burden Hideki was carrying. She may not have known the boy's past, but ever since they met him, she always knew there was something he was carrying that filled him with sadness. "That's right. I'd have no problem teaching you how to control your ki," he commented kindly. "You could even learn to use Tuki, which is an advanced technique. I've noticed that your ki is surprisingly strong for a normal human." Hideki's eyes widened in wonder, but his excitement was tinged with an underlying sadness. He remembered Kyom mentioning something about Tuki, but hearing about it from Kaori made the possibility of new hope feel more real, and at the same time more overwhelming. "I definitely want to learn," she replied, trying to hide the mix of anxiety and hope in her voice. "Can you sense my ki? Could you explain a little more exactly what it is?" Kaori tilted her head, pleased by Hideki's curiosity, and took a moment to choose her words carefully. "Ki is the life energy that flows through all living beings," he began to explain. "It's the force that sustains you, what keeps you alive and active. The stronger and healthier you are, the more powerful your life energy will be. Controlling it allows you to enhance your physical abilities, increase your stamina, and eventually develop techniques like Tuki, which focuses that energy to increase your physical and defensive strength." Hideki pondered those words, slowly processing what they meant. The idea of having a hidden force within him was new, but he was beginning to understand why Kyom, and now Kaori, had mentioned ki to him. "Do you think I could learn to control it?" he asked seriously, his voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and determination. Kaori nodded again, looking at him confidently. "Of course, Hideki. With proper training, discipline, and a little patience, you could master your ki and use Tuki. It's not something that happens overnight, but with effort I know you'll achieve it." After the Nishimiya revelation, the couple returned to their room, leaving Hideki alone with his thoughts. The silence of the night enveloped him, and he sat on his futon, staring at the cast on his arm, his mind drifting from his physical injuries to the abyss of his inner turmoil. Everything he had learned that day, from his conversation with Kyom to the shocking revelation about the Nishimiya family, had left him overwhelmed and emotionally exhausted. "A supernatural world magic yokai," he murmured to himself, lying back in bed and staring at the ceiling. "This isn't a simple dream or fantasy, it's real." The weight of the revelations was palpable. Before coming to this world, he had been a quirkless boy in an environment where supernatural powers were the norm. But now he was in a completely new place, where the supernatural not only existed, but had become a fundamental part of his life. The idea of developing real abilities was both a source of hope and an overwhelming burden, and the connection he was forming with this world made his desire to return home feel increasingly confusing. Will this be my chance to return? If I can master Ki, will I be able to find a way back home? Hope surged through his mind, but it was soon overtaken by doubt and sadness. He couldn't ignore the fact that, in this new world, he'd begun to build relationships and find a purpose he'd never imagined. Kaneko, Kyom, the Nishimiya family here, he wasn't just a boy without powers like he had been in his own world. Here, he seemed to have the chance to be something more, and that only made his decision to return home even more complicated. But do I really want to go back? The question hit him hard, and the weight of his doubt settled over him like a shadow. Since arriving here, he'd always thought returning home was his only goal, but now, with each passing day, he felt his connection to this world grow stronger. Did he really want to leave behind what he'd begun to learn and the people who cared for him? No, maybe that thought not wanting to return because of the relationships he was building was just an excuse to cover up what he truly desired. This opportunity to gain power, after so many years yearning for a quirk, had presented itself to him almost as if fate were offering him a second chance. He just had to go to another world to achieve it. His mind flashed back to a painful memory from his previous life. He was 15 years old, in his first year at Kuoh Academy. During a training camp, a tragic incident occurred. He and Bakuga Katsuki were kidnapped by the League of Villains. The villains were interested in Bakuga's explosive attitude, which they considered worthy of a future villain. As for Hideki, the only one who had shown interest in him was All for One. He never understood the reason behind that interest, but All for One offered him something he'd, until that moment, dreamed of his entire life: a quirk. A power, exactly what he'd longed for. But All for One wasn't just offering him a quirk, he was offering him a path to darkness, a path that would betray everything he believed was right. Despite his deep desire to have a quirk, Hideki rejected the offer. He couldn't become a villain, he couldn't betray his own values, or give up who he was just to gain the power he'd always craved. Now, in this world, that opportunity had arisen again, albeit under different circumstances. Here, there were no malicious offers from villains, but the dilemma remained: what was he willing to sacrifice to gain power? And how would that affect his true desire to return to his world? Would he have to give up on his idea of returning to his own world? Hideki stood silently, staring out his bedroom window. The moon lit up the night sky, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of his decisions crushing him. He remembered how, in his own world, he had always wanted to be a hero. But now, in this new world, the word hero had a different meaning. Could he truly consider himself a hero if his desire for power was based on something as selfish as the need to feel complete? Is this what I always wanted? He wondered, his mind swirling between desire and doubt. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on her bedroom door. It was Kaori, holding a cup of tea. "I thought you might like something to relax you before bed," he said with a soft smile. His presence always had a calming effect. Hideki accepted the cup and nodded gratefully, although his mind was still restless. "Kaori-san, do you think that if I ever learned to master this ki, I could?" He hesitated before continuing. "Could I use it for more than just defense?" Kaori stared at him, as if she understood the depth of his question. She approached, sat opposite him, and spoke with serene calm. "Ki is a source of life. It's not just for protection or attack. It's balance, it's control over oneself and one's environment. But ki isn't a magic key that solves all problems," Kaori explained. "It's a tool, and like any tool, it depends on how you use it, and above all, why you use it." Hideki nodded slowly, understanding Kaori's words, but a part of him couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of using it as a means to find his way home. "Kyoma-senpai already explained a little about ki and tuki to me, but I feel like it's more than just a combat technique. There's something more to it, right?" he asked, searching for an answer that would calm his thoughts. Kaori looked at him with a slight smile, but her eyes showed a mixture of understanding and concern. "You're right, Hideki. Ki can open doors, but not all of those doors lead to what you seek. Sometimes, on the path to what you think you want, you find other things that change your perspective. Power, if not balanced with the right purpose, can lead you down dangerous paths." Kaori's words echoed in Hideki's mind. The right purpose. What was his true purpose? To return to his world? To be a hero? Or to move forward in this new place where he was beginning to find a reason to stay? "You have much to learn, Hideki. But remember, this true power lies not in what you can do for yourself, but in how you can help others through what you learn. You've already done that here, without even knowing it," Kaori added, with a gentle smile. "Take your time. Don't rush into decisions." Hideki watched her silently, understanding what she was saying. The doubt remained, but clarity was beginning to dawn. Did he really have to rush into finding an answer? Maybe this new world had something more to offer him, something he hadn't yet discovered. "Thank you, Kaori-san," he said finally. "I really appreciate what you're teaching me and what you and Takashi have done for me." Kaori nodded affectionately before standing up. "Rest, Hideki. Tomorrow we'll start your training, but today you need a clear mind and body." When the door closed behind her, Hideki was left alone with his thoughts again. There were still many unanswered questions, but one thing was certain: his life in this world would not be simple. He couldn't ignore the call of power, nor the desire to return home, but he now understood that everything would depend on the purpose he chose to follow. He looked at the moon once more, closed his eyes, and prepared for what was to come. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Hideki found himself standing in the restaurant's backyard with Kaori. The fresh morning air cleared his mind, although a slight nervousness lingered. This would be his first serious training since coming into this world, and although excitement filled him, he knew what he was about to learn wasn't something ordinary. "Today we're going to start with the basics," Kaori said, crossing her arms as she looked around. "Your arm is still in a cast, so we'll focus on the flow of your ki. As I've already told you, ki is the energy that flows through you, and to control it, you must first learn to feel it. It all starts with your breathing and your ability to connect with that internal energy." Hideki nodded, concentrating on her words. This was completely different from any type of physical training he'd done before. This wasn't just about strength or endurance, but something much deeper: an internal control that required calm and focus. "Sit down, close your eyes, and listen to your body," Kaori instructed, pointing to a space on the floor. "Inhale and exhale deeply. Feel the air moving in and out of your lungs. Visualize your ki as a river flowing through you, slow but steady." With his casted arm resting in his lap, Hideki sat on the grass and closed his eyes. He inhaled deeply, allowing the sound of his breathing to fill his mind. At first, he could only focus on the dull ache of his broken arm and the discomfort of the cast, which was starting to frustrate him. "Don't rush it," Kaori said in her usual soft, calm voice. "Ki isn't something you can force. It's like a silk thread: it moves smoothly, and if you pull too hard, it will break. Just flow with it." She noticed Hideki starting to get impatient and decided to intervene with reassuring calm. Hideki took a deep breath, trying to relax once more. Little by little, he began to feel a slight vibration inside his body. It was a faint but present sensation, like a current he had ignored until that moment. Without resistance, he allowed that energy to flow through him, following Kaori's instructions. The sensation was strange yet comforting, as if something inside him had awakened from a long sleep. "I'm sorry a little," she finally murmured, opening her eyes with a touch of uncertainty. "But it's so faint I don't know how to control it." Kaori gave him a slight smile, satisfied with the progress she had made. "That's normal," he replied confidently. "Feeling your ki is only the first step. Controlling it takes time, patience, and above all, consistency. We'll continue like this until you can feel your ki at all times, without needing to focus solely on it." Hideki nodded, though he still struggled to accept that something as abstract as ki could take so long to master. He was used to intense physical training, where pain and immediate effort translated into tangible improvements. But this was different. It was more subtle, more delicate. "Patience has never been my strong suit," he admitted with a tired smile as he closed his eyes again, trying to refocus his mind on that inner current. Kaori watched him with a mixture of understanding and determination. She knew Hideki was used to pushing his physical limits, but this kind of training required a different kind of discipline, a more introspective one. "It's natural to want immediate results," Kaori said as she sat down beside him. "But ki doesn't respond to brute force. It requires that you listen to it, that you feel it in every part of you. Don't rush it, just let it flow." The silence between them fell once more, interrupted only by the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. Hideki tried to do as Kaori suggested, releasing his tension and letting that faint vibration within him move freely. With each passing minute, though progress was slow, Hideki began to feel that energy flowing within him more clearly. It was no longer a vague or unreachable current now; he perceived it in various parts of his body, as if every fiber of his being were recognizing, for the first time, something that had always been there, dormant. "I feel it more clearly," he whispered, almost as if he was afraid that speaking any louder might break the fragile connection he just established. "But it's still hard to control." Kaori gave him a warm smile, her eyes radiating understanding and patience. "That's the next step," he said, his tone gentle but confident. "Ki isn't something you force. You must learn to guide it, not impose your will on it. It's a dance with your environment, not a battle against it." Hideki opened his eyes, looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and reflection. Her words struck him in a strange way, touching something deep within him. It was a different philosophy, almost contradictory to what he had grown up believing. Then, a distant memory surfaced in his mind. Vital Strike, a retired hero and one of his mentors at Kuoh Academy. That old warrior, always strict and serious, had told him something similar during their training. Hideki had arrived in Osaka for his internship after the UA Sports Festival. The place where he would be training was an old dojo, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Upon entering, he was greeted by a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. As soon as he took a step inside the dojo, he felt a murderous instinct directed toward him, so intense that he stepped back, almost stumbling, swearing he'd been attacked. So much for bloodlust, the old hero muttered as he watched Hideki retreat. Young man, you hold so much aggression within you. For a moment I thought you were a villain. Hideki, flustered and bewildered, bowed in apology. Please forgive me, Vital Strike Sensei, but I think you're mistaken, he said respectfully, not fully understanding what was happening. I felt like he was attacking me, or did I imagine it? The old hero snorted disdainfully, taking a step forward. Your ears are still wet, boy. Tell me, what's your name? It's an honor to meet you, Vital Strike Sensei. I'm Hideki Saito, Hideki replied, bowing deeply. Hideki, huh? You have no grace at all, the retired hero snarled disdainfully. What do you mean? Hideki asked, clearly confused and somewhat offended. The way you act toward me, the old hero said, leaning closer, his eyes piercing. I saw you at the sports festival. You attack with aggression, with unbridled violence. You try to dominate your opponents with a ferocity that almost makes you feel like you want to kill them. That's your own bloodlust, your own uncontrolled rage. Hideki stared at him in a daze, unable to process what he was hearing. Your killing intent is clumsy and disastrous. Do you think I was going to attack you? What you felt was nothing more than a reflection of your own fury, Vital Strike continued, his voice deep but firm. Your own bloodlust turns against you, and that makes you weak. What you displayed at the festival wasn't true strength. Only unchecked brutality. Hideki frowned, still processing what the hero was telling him. That is not true strength, Vital Strike said harshly. You are only clumsy and disastrous when you allow your bloodlust to control you. If you want to be more than that, you must learn to master yourself before you attempt to master others. Vital Strike taught him that combat wasn't just a matter of brute strength. You're like a wild beast, he'd once told him. You only think about dominating your opponent with power. That's not true strength, you're just clumsy and messy. True strength doesn't come from your physical abilities alone. It comes from inner serenity, from the balance between mind and body. During his time with him, Hideki had learned that it wasn't simply about improving his martial prowess, but about finding harmony within himself. Vital Strike always insisted that a calm mind was as essential as a strong body, and that only when spirit and body were in sync could one unleash one's full potential. The memory of Vital Strike echoed in Hideki's mind, almost as if the old hero were present, watching his progress. That moment in the dojo, the harsh but sincere words, now took on even more meaning. He had spent so much time focusing on brute force that he had forgotten the most important lessons: balance, calm, serenity. Now he understood those words better. He had spent so much time focused on combat, on aggression, that he forgot that true strength wasn't just a matter of physical power, but of balance and control. Hideki opened his eyes, his breathing more controlled now. He could feel the ki beginning to flow more consistently through his body. It wasn't just a distant stream, he now sensed its presence in different parts of his being. The tingling in his limbs was clearer, more distinct, though still faint. I'm sorry, better now, he said softly, almost as if he didn't want to break the calm surrounding him. But it's hard to stay in control. Kaori, watching him silently, nodded slowly. She noticed the change in his breathing and posture, small signs that he was beginning to understand what she was trying to teach him. You're making progress, she said gently. But remember, ki isn't something you control with force. It's about fluidity. You must allow it to align with your body and spirit. Hideki nodded, remembering Vital Strike's words. It's not about imposing your will, but about connecting with the world. That lesson was still a barrier for him, but he was beginning to glimpse what it meant. He took another deep breath, this time trying not to force anything, just to feel. Kaori stood up and walked slowly toward him. She stopped beside him, and with a friendly gesture, indicated that he should extend his good hand forward. Close your eyes again. This time, try to sense the ki around you, not just within you, he told her, his voice always calm and serene. The world is full of energy. If you can sense it, you'll begin to understand what it means to harmonize with your surroundings. Hideki obeyed, closing his eyes and concentrating, searching for that connection he'd only faintly perceived until now. At first, everything was still dark and vague. He only felt his own breathing and the dull ache in his broken arm. But little by little, the atmosphere around him began to change. It wasn't a physical change, but a sensation, as if something invisible were surrounding him, like a gentle breeze that barely touched his skin. I'm sorry, he murmured, almost surprised by what he was experiencing. It's like a soft echo around me. Exactly, Kaori replied with a reassuring smile. Ki flows not only within you, but through everything around you. With practice, you will be able to guide that energy, tune into it, and use it to strengthen your body, mind, and spirit. Hideki remained motionless, focused on that sensation. It was as if the world around him had taken on a new dimension, something he'd never noticed before. But even so, he couldn't help wondering how this might help him in real combat, against enemies far beyond his physical capabilities. But this, how will it help me in a fight? He asked, without opening his eyes. I don't feel like this makes me stronger or faster. How am I supposed to take on beings much more powerful than me with this? Kaori watched him silently for a few seconds before answering. Ki isn't just for battle, he said calmly. It's for maintaining peace within yourself, even in the most chaotic moments. In combat, the one who gives in to despair or anger is the one who loses, because they've lost control. True strength doesn't always lie in being stronger or faster, but in knowing when to act and how. Hideki pondered those words. Perhaps that was the missing piece, the one he had always ignored in his pursuit of power. For him, strength had always been a matter of dominating others, of overcoming his enemies through sheer determination and physical skill. But now he understood that he must also learn to control himself. We'll leave it at that for today, Kaori suddenly commented, surprising Hideki, who was so focused on sensing his ki that he didn't notice the signal from his training. The abrupt interruption pulled him out of his concentration and caused him to stumble and fall to the ground. HMHM, Kaori chuckled at Hideki's fall, a playful smile on her face. Hee, you still have a lot to learn. You can't lose focus so easily, ha ha ha. Hideki stood up, a slight blush on his cheeks as he tried to hide his embarrassment. Kaori, though she was trying to contain her laughter, showed the warmth of his support in her eyes. But yes, we'll leave it at that today, he finally said, regaining his composure. It's late, and you'd better get ready to go to the academy. Training can be exhausting, but you also have to fulfill your responsibilities. Hideki nodded, though he was still a little flushed from the embarrassing moment. He dusted his clothes off and prepared to leave. Thank you for today, Kaori-san, he said with a grateful smile. I really appreciate everything you've taught me. Kaori gave him a warm smile and nodded. You're welcome, Hideki. Keep practicing and remember what we talked about. It's not just about strength, but also about connecting with yourself and the world. See you later. With one last smile, Kaori headed toward the restaurant door as Hideki prepared to leave. As he left the restaurant, Hideki couldn't help but reflect on the training session. Despite the fall and the unexpected interruption, he felt he had taken a small but significant step forward in his understanding of ki. He headed toward the academy with a clearer mind, aware that he still had a long way to go. But with each step, he felt closer to balancing his inner and outer strength, an important lesson on his journey not only to learn to control ki, but to discover his true purpose in this new world. The walk to the academy seemed unusually quick and pleasant. Although he was no longer focused on sensing his ki, he noticed that his body had begun to adapt to the changes. His senses had subtly sharpened, allowing him to perceive his surroundings with renewed clarity. The breeze on his skin, the distant murmur of the city, and even the light crunch of the leaves beneath his feet seemed more vivid. Her mind also felt calmer, a state of tranquility she hadn't experienced in a long time. A small smile spread across her face as she walked, feeling a slight sense of optimism for the first time since she came into this world. Upon arriving at the academy, Hideki walked quickly toward his classroom, aware that he was a little late. He entered just in time for the start of class, breathing a sigh of relief. Despite the rush, his mind was in an unusually calm state, a remnant of his training with Kaori. During class, Hideki seemed strangely distracted to his classmates. He kept a slight smile on his face, his eyes often closed in a calm expression that contrasted with his usual seriousness. His classmates had never seen him like this before, and to the girls, this new calm expression and the gentle smile on his face made him seem even more attractive. As the teacher explained the day's topic, Hideki tried to actively participate in the class, but he couldn't stop his thoughts from wandering to the flow of his ki. He decided that, instead of simply attending class, he would use this time to practice concentrating on his ki in an ingenious way. He focused on feeling the flow of energy within him while trying to pay attention to the lessons. He closed his eyes for a few moments, feeling the ki moving gently through his body, almost like a current intertwined with his breathing. The sensation of fluid energy became a mental exercise that helped him stay focused, despite the distractions of his surroundings. Although maintaining concentration on ki required constant effort, Hideki felt a deep satisfaction in integrating this practice into his daily routine. Every moment, even the most mundane, became an opportunity to advance on his learning path. The class, while not particularly challenging in terms of content, had become a mental training ground for him. In fact, Hideki had lost focus a total of 113 times during classes, and he had taken the time to record each of them. This meticulous record reflected his dedication and effort to improve. Finally, it was time for lunch. Many girls approached Hideki, attracted by his new attitude. During the break, his unusual behavior in class had caught the attention of his classmates, and now, surrounded by a group of curious girls eager to chat with him, Hideki felt both overwhelmed and flattered. "Your attitude is so different today. What happened to you?" one of the girls asked, her curiosity evident. I've just been taking care of some things," Hideki said, trying not to give too much away. The truth was, the peace of mind he felt was a direct result of his recent practice and the new perspective he'd gained on his situation in this world. Somewhat overwhelmed by the attention he was receiving and the fact that he hadn't had lunch yet, Hideki quickly left the classroom to avoid being followed. He headed toward his usual eating spot, a tree a little far from the classrooms. There, he leaned against the trunk, trying to regain some peace and quiet. However, when he opened his backpack to take out his lunch, he realized he had forgotten to pack it. The morning of training with Kaori had made him forget one of the most important details. Discouraged, he considered heading to the cafeteria, but instantly dismissed the idea. By now, the cafeteria would be packed with students engaged in some sort of lunch war. He sighed in resignation and leaned back against the tree, closing his eyes in a desperate attempt to distract himself from his hunger while he focused on his ki. It was at that moment that he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see Kaneko Tuju approaching him. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern at seeing him there, alone under the tree. "Hideki-senpai, what are you doing here alone?" Kaneko asked, noticing his resigned expression. "Oh, Kaneko," Hideki said, smiling weakly. "I forgot my lunch and didn't want to face the battle in the cafeteria, so I came here to rest a bit." Kaneko raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the situation. She walked over and sat next to him. "If you're hungry, you should come with me," Kaneko suggested. "I have some food I can share." Hideki was surprised by the gesture and looked at Kaneko gratefully. Although his stomach was growling with hunger, his smile widened at Kaneko's kindness. "I don't want to cause you any trouble," Hideki said, trying to decline the offer. "It's not a problem," Kaneko insisted. "Besides, it's more fun to eat with others." With a small smile, Hideki accepted and stood up. Kaneko took a small lunch box out of her backpack and offered it to him. Together they headed to a quiet corner near the tree, where they both sat down and began sharing the food. While they ate, Kaneko chatted animatedly, which helped Hideki relax and enjoy the moment. "Thank you, Kaneko," Hideki said, taking a bite of the food she had offered him. "I really needed this." "You're welcome," Kaneko replied with a smile. "Sometimes, sharing a good lunch is what it takes to feel better." As the conversation continued, Hideki realized how important it was to have these small moments of connection and support. Although the road ahead was still uncertain, he was grateful for the people who stood by him in this new world, and for the simple moments that could offer comfort and companionship. As they shared the meal, Kaneko noticed the slight smile on Hideki's face, something she hadn't seen before, at least not so casually. His relaxed expression and the way he enjoyed his lunch seemed to indicate that he was happier and more at peace. Hideki-senpai, Kaneko began curiously. You seem more relaxed today. Has anything changed? Hideki looked at Kaneko, surprised by the remark. He realized that her positive mood hadn't gone unnoticed, even by her classmates. Although he'd been deep in thought and training, he hadn't noticed how much her mood had changed. Well, Hideki said, taking a sip of his drink. I'm just enjoying the day and what I'm learning. His tone tried to be measured, but it couldn't hide the glimmer of enthusiasm in his eyes. Today I was able to remember many things my teacher taught me. It's amazing how we can sometimes forget important lessons, but today's training was truly special. Your teacher? Kaneko asked curiously. Do you play any sports, Hideki-senpai? Oh, that's right, you don't know, Hideki replied with a smile. I've been practicing martial arts since I was little. About 2 years ago, I met Ryu-sensei, who taught me many valuable things. For personal reasons, I had to move to this city, he continued, pausing as he searched for a way to express that he couldn't return to his teacher. Today, while I was training, I remembered many of those teachings. Kaneko looked at him intently, interested in the story behind his training and the impact it had had on him. The conversation flowed naturally, allowing Hideki to share a piece of his past while strengthening his connection with Kaneko. Kaneko, intrigued, tilted her head slightly. That must have been very important to you, she commented, with a mixture of curiosity and empathy. It's amazing how what we learned from the past can have such an impact on our present. Hideki nodded, his eyes reflecting a hint of nostalgia. Yes, it definitely is. Sometimes, when I feel lost or confused, remembering those moments and teachings helps me find my way again, although it may take me a while to remember. Ha ha ha. He laughed with joy and a touch of embarrassment as he admitted that he had forgotten certain things from his training and that it had been difficult for him to remember them. Kaneko smiled at him with understanding. Tell me, what was your teacher like? She asked, genuinely interested. Ryu-sensei was a wise and very strict man, straightforward with his words, Hideki replied with a small laugh, recalling how they first met. When I met him, we hadn't even spoken, and he'd already pointed out all my mistakes. And I have to admit, he was right about everything. Ha. That sounds very comforting. I'm glad to see you're finding something that makes you feel better. We all need those moments of clarity. Hideki smiled back, appreciating Kaneko's support. Thank you so much, Kaneko. And speaking of support, I'm glad to have a friend like you to share these moments with. Kaneko blushed slightly, looking down at the ground before answering. It's nothing, Hideki-senpai. I'm glad I can be here for you. If you ever need to talk or someone to confide in, I'm here. Hideki felt a warmth in his chest at Kaneko's words. He realized how valuable her presence was in his life, especially in such an unfamiliar world. I really appreciate it, Hideki said genuinely. And the same goes for you. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to let me know. The silence was filled with a quiet comfort, and Hideki leaned back a little further into the tree, enjoying the moment of peace. Without thinking twice, Hideki reached out to stroke Kaneko's head. At first, she didn't seem to notice, but when she felt Hideki's hand brush against her hair, she instinctively moved away, avoiding him completely. I'm so sorry, Kaneko. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, Hideki apologized immediately, with a mixture of surprise and regret. I'd better go. Forgive me, Kaneko. He was ready to get up and leave, afraid he'd crossed the line. However, before he could, Kaneko gently took his hand, her face turned away as if she wanted to hide something. No, it's not that, Hideki-senpai. It was just very sudden, and Kaneko whispered, her fingers tightening their grip on Hideki's hand. Feeling his touch, Kaneko noticed how rough and battered his hands were due to the calluses accumulated over the years. And I didn't expect Senpai's hand to be so battered, she muttered, still avoiding looking at him directly. Hideki was surprised by Kaniko's reaction and unexpected comment. Well, I guess it's a result of my training, he replied with a small, nervous laugh, still holding his hand. Though I don't feel it's something to admire. Kaniko gently shook her head, finally looking up at him briefly. That's not true. It says a lot about how hard you're trying, he said, almost in a whisper, before gently letting go of her hand. After a brief moment of silence, Kaniko took a breath, trying to look at him directly this time, although her eyes strayed whenever they met Hideki's. If you want, you can try again, he said, his voice barely a whisper, as he lowered his head slightly, giving her access. Hideki blinked in surprise, but smiled warmly before raising his hand once more. Carefully and tenderly, he stroked Kaniko's hair, enjoying its softness as she remained motionless. Kaniko slowly closed her eyes, relaxing under Hideki's touch. Your hand isn't as rough as I thought, he said, his tone calmer. As she felt the caresses, Kaniko couldn't help but think, Senpai's hand is so big and warm it feels safe. Hideki let out a small laugh, withdrawing his hand after a few moments. Thank you for everything, Kaniko, he said sincerely, appreciating the trust she had shown him. Kaniko nodded silently, her face slightly flushed, but with a small smile appearing on her lips. The moment was brief, but charged with a deeper connection between them. Finally, Kaniko looked at her watch and stood up. It's time to get back to school. I don't want us to be delayed any longer, he said gently. Yeah, you're right, Hideki replied, also standing up. Let's go. Together, they walked back toward the academy, each carrying with them a new understanding of the trust and bond they shared. At the end of the day, Hideki felt satisfied with his ability to balance his focus on ki with his attention in class. The combination of practice and learning was giving him a new perspective on how to face challenges. The conversation with Kaniko had been a comforting moment that accentuated that sense of well-being. As he headed to his next class, the smile on his face remained, a reflection of the inner peace he had begun to find amidst his efforts to adapt to his new world. The connection he had made with Kaniko and the progress in his training gave him a renewed sense of purpose and calm, making the day, despite the difficulties, end with a touch of hope and satisfaction. Kaniko had entered the Occult Club room with a small smile on her face. As always, Rias and Aquino were already there. The albino sat down on one of the sofas and began eating her sweets with tea. Aquino, noticing Kaniko's unusually cheerful attitude, approached with a mischievous expression on her face. Wow, Kaniko, you seem to be in a very good mood today, Aquino said, smiling mischievously. Could it be that someone has been giving you reasons to smile? Kaniko looked up from her tea, her expression a little flushed but remaining calm. It's nothing in particular, he replied, trying to keep the conversation neutral. I've just had a good day. Rias, watching the interaction with interest, decided to intervene to change the focus. Aquino, don't be so inquisitive, Rias said, her tone softer. Kaniko has the right to enjoy her day without being interrogated. Aquino grimaced in disappointment, but pulled back with a playful smile. It's okay. I'm just glad to see Kaniko so happy, he said as he returned to his seat. Rias looked at Kaniko with a sympathetic expression. I'm glad to see you're so lively, Kaniko. Did anything exciting happen today? Kaniko nodded slightly, her smile growing a little. Yes, I had a good conversation with Hideki-senpai. I had always perceived a sadness in him, but today I saw him much happier and more relaxed. Rias nodded, her gaze reflecting understanding. That's good to hear. Sometimes finding small joys and connections in a new environment can make a big difference. The group continued chatting, the atmosphere relaxed, and the conversation flowed between various topics. While Kaniko enjoyed her time at the club, she was so content that she forgot to mention to Rias that she noticed an increase in Hideki's aura, sensing how his ki had become more present. A week had passed, and thanks to Kaori's skills, Hideki had fully recovered from his broken arm. At that moment, the two were in the middle of a training session. I can see how your ki perception has improved, Hideki, Kaori commented as she observed that Hideki was now able to maintain focus on his own ki even during his daily activities. Thank you very much, Kaori-san. It's all thanks to your teachings, Hideki replied with a slight bow. Now that you've finally managed to maintain your concentration on ki steadily, it's time to learn how to direct it, Kaori said as she stood up and adopted a combat stance, indicating for Hideki to do the same. Ki can enhance your strength, speed, and even endurance, but first you need to channel it properly. Use your arm to try it out. Pay attention to the internal flow of your ki, Kaori added, preparing for the practice. Hideki stood up, took a deep breath, trying to reconnect with the energy he'd sensed earlier. He moved slowly, raising his arm to throw a punch, but Kaori easily dodged it. Try again. Slower. Feel the ki moving inside you, Kaori said calmly. Hideki tried again, concentrating on visualizing the energy flowing from his core to his arm. This time, his blow was more controlled, but Kaori blocked it effortlessly, nodding in approval. Better. You're starting to use your ki, but you still need more control, she commented. Remember, ki isn't just strength. It's a balance between body and mind. You must allow your ki to flow freely, without restrictions. Hours passed as they trained, with Kaori guiding Hideki to focus on his breathing and that inner connection. Although he was still far from mastering the technique, Hideki noticed a difference in his movements. They were more fluid and precise. Finally, Kaori stopped and smiled at him. That's enough for today. You've made good progress, he said, offering her a bottle of water. Hideki, sweaty and exhausted, gratefully took the bottle of water Kaori offered him. This is harder than I imagined, he admitted between gasps, still recovering from the effort. It's normal, Kaori replied with a calm smile as she sat down next to him. Mastering ki and tuki isn't something you achieve in a single day. But you have potential. Your years of physical training give you an advantage, you just need to be patient. Hideki took a sip of water and looked up at the sky, his mind wandering as his thoughts mingled. He'd made progress since coming to this world, but the road ahead still felt endless and full of challenges. He stammered, unable to find the right words. Kaori, noticing his hesitation, looked at him with concern. What's wrong, Hideki? She asked softly. Before you found me, I didn't know if I wanted to go on, if I even had a reason to live, she confessed, her voice tinged with a deep melancholy. I felt powerless, like everything I did was meaningless. An emotional silence stretched between them as Kaori gave him the space to vent. But then after you gave me a home, after you offered me love, she continued, pausing, searching for a way to express what she truly felt. I decided I wanted to keep living. You gave me a reason to. Hideki looked down for a moment before adding, what I mean is I'm very grateful to you. Without you, I'd probably be dead already. Kaori looked at him tenderly, understanding the magnitude of his confession. She remained silent for a few seconds, allowing Hideki's words to float in the air, imbued with meaning. She remembered the state she had found him in, starving from lack of food, covered in filth from weeks without a place to wash, and dressed in torn and worn clothes. That day, seeing him so vulnerable, she had realized that this young man had been through trials that would have broken anyone. Hideki, she finally said, her voice filled with warmth. I'm glad you found a reason to keep going. No matter how dark the path, there will always be light if we choose to seek it. And never forget, you don't have to walk it alone. Hideki looked at her, his eyes slightly glittering. He wasn't used to sharing such thoughts, to being vulnerable, but something about the way Kaori treated him made him feel safe, as if for the first time in a long time he didn't have to carry everything alone. Thank you, Kaori-san, he said, his voice firmer. I don't know how I'll ever be able to repay you for everything you've done for me, but I want to try. I want to become stronger, not just for myself, but to protect this home you've given me. Kaori smiled tenderly. You don't need to give us anything back. The fact that you're still here, that you're here, is enough. And if protecting this home is what motivates you, then use that feeling to keep moving forward. True power doesn't always come from being the strongest, but from protecting what you love. Hideki nodded, feeling the weight of his emotions lighten a little. His thoughts were still jumbled, but now he had a clearer sense of purpose. Life had given him another chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Okay, he finally said, a new determination shining in his eyes. I'll keep training. Not just for myself, but for all of you. Kaori gently patted him on the shoulder, her smile full of approval. That's the attitude you need. Now, let's get some rest. Tomorrow will be another day of training, but today, you've already made a lot of progress. With that, they both fell silent, enjoying the moment under the sky, with Hideki feeling that, little by little, his path was becoming clearer. The night was cold, and the rain pounded the ground, a constant rumble that seemed synchronized with the tension in the air. High atop a building, the figure of a man stood motionless, as if part of the night itself. His deep voice broke the silence. "I am revenge." The echo of those words resonated in the darkness. The rain continued to fall, and a flash of lightning briefly illuminated the horizon, casting its imposing silhouette against the stormy sky. "I am the night." Cracking! A nearby flash of lightning illuminated the scene, briefly revealing the details of his attire: lightweight armor of modern design, decorated with dark blue patterns that gleamed faintly in the rain. The man, in a defiant pose, let out his climax. "I am Batman." He looked ready to disappear into the night, his posture reflecting determination and an air of mystery. But then, suddenly, "Bwajajajaja," the same voice, which had been deep and intimidating a moment before, transformed into genuine laughter. The man leaned forward slightly, holding his sides as he laughed heartily, his laughter completely out of step with the dramatic tone of his previous tone. "Ha! I've always wanted to do that," he muttered to himself, still laughing. He took a few steps forward, and the dim light from a nearby streetlight illuminated his partially masked face. Although it wasn't immediately obvious, anyone who knew him would know who it was: Hideki. With a satisfied smile, he let out a sigh, as if he had just granted a childhood wish. And so, in the midst of the storm, the hero, powerless but with infinite determination, continued on his way, laughter still vibrating in the air. With renewed determination, Hideki descended the building, his movements extremely agile, just like those of a professional parkourist, if not better. The decision was made: if he wanted to be a true hero, he had to be one no matter what world he was in. He didn't have a quirk, but he had his will, his training, and a strong desire to help others. The city was quiet, or at least it seemed that way. He walked through the dark streets, under the intermittent glow of streetlights and the constant patter of rain, alert for any sign of danger. It didn't take long to find her. A scream broke the calm. "Stop! Please don't take my bag!" Hideki quickly turned toward the direction of the scream. A few feet away, a woman was struggling to hold on to her bag while a hooded man tugged on it roughly. Another individual was closer, surveying the surroundings, clearly complicit. Without thinking, Hideki rushed towards the scene. "Hey! Leave her alone." The two thieves turned to him. One of them let out a sarcastic laugh. "And who are you? A kid playing at being a hero?" Hideki wasted no time. With a swift movement, he took up a defensive stance, his feet firmly planted on the rain-slicked ground. The training of the past few weeks was beginning to bear fruit, and this was the first real opportunity to put it to the test. The first thief, the larger one, lunged at him, confident in his physical advantage. But Hideki had spent hours perfecting his technique, not counting his previous fights back home. He easily dodged the first blow, using the attacker's momentum to push him into a nearby post. The other thief tried to attack from behind, but Hideki spotted him in time. A quick twist and a precise strike to the wrist caused the thief to drop a knife he'd drawn. Seizing the opportunity, Hideki completely disarmed him and shoved him to the ground, immobilizing him with a lock he'd learned. As he held the second thief to the ground, a thought crossed his mind: these thieves are nothing compared to those in my world. Even the most common criminal there would be 10 or 20 times more dangerous than this pair. He recalled how in his world, criminals often possessed supernatural abilities or lethal quirks. These men, on the other hand, relied more on intimidation than their ability to fight or actually do harm. Here, it seems most have neither the intention nor the means to be truly violent, at least not seriously. He took a deep breath and loosened his grip slightly. While these thieves weren't much of a match in terms of skill, he knew he couldn't completely underestimate them. Making sure they were both completely subdued, he stood up and stepped away. "I don't know what you were hoping to find tonight, but you made a grave mistake," Hideki said, his voice filled with determination. The first thief tried to get up, but Hideki, staying alert, stopped him with a kick that forced him to fall again. Taking out his phone, he quickly dialed the police, making sure both criminals were neutralized as he spoke. "I've stopped an attempted robbery in the Central District. 2 suspects are under control. Please send someone." The woman, still in shock, approached, clutching her bag. "Thank you, I don't know what I would have done without you." "It's okay, ma'am. The police are on their way." Stay close, they'll prioritize your statement. The thieves, knowing they couldn't escape, remained on the ground, resigned. Hideki didn't lose sight of them for a second, making sure they didn't try anything. Minutes later, red and blue lights illuminated the street, and 2 officers got out of a patrol car. Hideki briefly explained the situation, while the woman confirmed her story. Before they left, one of the officers turned to him, a mixture of gratitude and warning in his voice. "Thank you for intervening. But be careful. Not all of these confrontations end so well." The officer took a step forward to make sure the young man had heard, but when he turned fully to where Hideki was, he realized something. "Huh! Where did he go?" Another agent, who had also been watching, blinked in disbelief. Even the woman who was staring at her savior was surprised. He disappeared just as she had blinked. It was there a second ago. They both looked around, trying to locate him, but Hideki had already disappeared, as if he had vanished into the rain and the shadows of the night. From the top of a nearby building, hidden in the shadows, Hideki watched as the police led the thieves away. A small smile crossed his face before disappearing again, leaving behind only the night and the distant echo of sirens. One step at a time, Hideki. One step at a time, he thought as he disappeared into the shadows, the rain falling softly on him. Days later, Kuoh City's routine was interrupted by a local news program. On television screens in shops, cafes, and homes, a reporter's face spoke excitedly, while blurry images and cell phone videos played in the background. "Breaking: a mysterious vigilante has begun appearing on the streets of Kuoh. Witnesses claim he intervened in several attempted robberies over the past few nights, subduing the criminals with impressive skill before disappearing without a trace." The video showed grainy images of 2 men handcuffed against a pole, while police officers spoke to each other. Another video captured a shadow leaping from one building to another, barely visible in the dim light of streetlights. While some residents express gratitude for what they describe as an unsung hero, others warn of the dangers of relying on an outlaw vigilante. Authorities have yet to issue an official statement about this vigilante, but there is speculation that he could be a martial arts expert or someone with military training. In the dining room of the Nishimiya house, Hideki watched the news with apparent indifference, sitting next to Hiro, who enjoyed a bowl of cereal while staring at the screen fascinated. "Wow, Mom! Look at that! It's just like in the comics! A real hero!" Hiro excitedly pointed at the television. Kaori, meanwhile, watched Hideki out of the corner of her eye, crossing her arms and raising an eyebrow. "An unsung hero, huh?" he said in a tone that combined curiosity and suspicion. Hideki, feeling Kaori's piercing gaze, tried to look relaxed as he took a sip of tea. "Yeah, interesting, huh? I'm sure he's someone with a lot of free time." Kaori kept her gaze fixed on him for a few more seconds before letting out a sigh. "I hope that someone knows what they're doing. It wouldn't be good if they ended up getting into bigger trouble." As Kaori walked back into the kitchen, muttering something about how some young people can be too impulsive, Hideki breathed a small sigh of relief. Hiro, however, continued talking excitedly. "I want to meet him. Do you think we could see him someday? I'd ask him how he learned to jump so high." Hideki ruffled Hiro's hair with a smile. "Maybe someday, little one. Maybe someday." However, as he said those words, he couldn't help but wonder how long he could keep his identity a secret. "We've got breaking news from downtown, where a massive fire is ravaging an apartment building. We're going live with our on-site reporter, Tanaka Yuki, who has all the details." "Tanaka, what's going on?" A middle-aged man spoke on television in the local news studio. The camera shifts to Tanaka Yuki, her face illuminated by the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles. Behind her, the building is engulfed in black smoke, with flames visible on the upper floors. "Thank you, Fujimoto. The situation here is critical. Flames have completely consumed the upper floors of this 8-story building, and emergency crews are battling not only the fire, but time itself. According to authorities, at least 3 people are still trapped on the upper floors, where the flames are more intense and the smoke is hampering any rescue attempts." The camera focuses on the 5th floor, where a woman waves a sheet from the window, screaming for help. The fire is getting dangerously close, and the anguished cries of the trapped residents are audible. Firefighters are currently attempting to reach the 5th and 6th floors, where people are still trapped. However, access is extremely dangerous, and every second counts. The tension here is palpable. Suddenly, the camera captures a young man with dark hair and a determined look crossing the safety line established by the firefighters. It's Hideki, his clothes soaked with water from a hose he borrowed to protect himself from the heat. Fujimoto, it looks like someone is trying to break into the building. Wait a minute! That man isn't part of the rescue team. Wait, he's a teenager. The camera follows him as he evades firefighters and enters the building through a first-floor window, ignoring the orders of emergency officials. Hey boy! It's dangerous. Come back immediately. What we're seeing is incredible and alarming. This man, apparently a civilian, has entered the building to try to rescue those trapped. We don't know who he is or what his intentions are, but he's clearly determined to help. The camera shifts to the upper floors, where the smoke thickens. Minutes later, between the blackened windows, Hideki appears, carrying a woman and child in his arms. His face is covered in sweat and soot, but his movements are steady. Something's coming out of the third floor, he shouted. It's the young man from earlier. Wait, he's going to jump. Hideki didn't hesitate. Holding the woman and baby firmly in his grasp, he launched himself outside, aiming for the inflatable mattress the firefighters had set up at the base of the building. The firefighters arrive with the mother holding the baby, both unconscious. However, Hideki doesn't stop and re-enters the building, ignoring the firefighters' warnings. Fujimoto, this is something we don't see every day. This young man is risking his life to save those trapped inside. However, the situation remains extremely dangerous. We don't know how much longer the building's structure will hold. The flames advance to the 6th floor, and the roof begins to creak. A firefighter takes the reporter's microphone and speaks directly into the camera. We ask that young man to leave immediately. The building is about to collapse. It's too risky. Moments earlier, Hideki was walking calmly through the city. With nothing urgent to attend to, he decided to take some time to relax and let his mind wander. However, his tranquility was interrupted when he noticed some people running past in panic, expressions of terror on their faces. When he looked up, his heart leapt. A huge column of black smoke rose above the buildings. Without hesitating for a second, Hideki started running toward the smoke, the sound of sirens increasing with every step he took. When he arrived, the scene was devastating. A building approximately 8 stories high was engulfed in flames, with fire and smoke pouring out of the windows on the upper floors. Near the security perimeter, Hideki spotted a reporter speaking live on camera. He decided to approach her to get more information. Thank you, Fujimoto. The situation here is critical. Flames have completely consumed the upper floors of this 6-story building, and emergency crews are battling not only the fire, but time itself. According to authorities, at least 6 people remain trapped on the upper floors, where conditions are extremely dangerous due to the heat and smoke, the reporter reported, her expression grave. Those words were all Hideki needed to hear. The situation was urgent, and there was no time for hesitation or preparation. He couldn't afford to search for his hero's suit or waste another second. With quick movements, he took off the jacket he was wearing and tied it around his head, covering his nose and mouth to protect himself from the smoke. Hey you! Stop! A firefighter shouted upon noticing their intentions. Someone stop that man! Another exclaimed, as several rescuers tried to intercept him. But Hideki, with impressive agility, dodged them without stopping, moving among them as if he could predict their movements. Every step he took brought him closer to the burning building. As he ran, his mind was fixed on a single goal: to save the trapped people, no matter the risk. The heat and roar of the flames were intimidating, but Hideki didn't hesitate. He knew every second counted, and he couldn't afford to fail. Once inside the building, Hideki began shouting on each floor, making sure no one was left behind. He knew he couldn't completely trust the reporter's words and wanted to personally ensure no one was trapped in the lower levels. He went through each apartment as quickly as he could, thoroughly checking every corner. Fortunately, the first 4 floors were empty. Wasting no time, he continued upward. As he reached the 5th floor, a barely audible sound stopped him in his tracks. Aid! The voice was weak, almost drowned out by the noise of the flames and the creaking of the building. Is anyone here? Hideki shouted, trying to locate the source of the call. A key, cough, cough. The sound, this time clearer, came accompanied by a desperate cough. Hideki quickly moved toward where he thought he'd heard the voice. He entered one of the apartments and, after a quick look, saw a woman trapped under a piece of wooden furniture that was partially on fire. Without hesitation, he ran towards her. "Hold on a little longer. I'll get you out of here." Hideki ignored the heat and the danger. He grabbed the heavy piece of furniture, his muscles tensing as he lifted it effortlessly. With a swift twist, he threw it against a wall, which cracked upon impact. When he finally approached the woman, he noticed she was tightly holding a baby, shielding it with her body. "Don't worry, you're safe now," he said as he carefully picked her up along with the baby. With both of them in his arms, Hideki left the apartment and began to descend the stairs. But when he reached the third floor, he realized that time was against him. The fire was spreading rapidly, and the stairs were beginning to weaken beneath his feet. He knew he couldn't risk being trapped with the woman and baby. Taking a risky decision, but confident in his recent training with Ki, he headed to the nearest window. Outside, amidst the chaos, reporter Tanaka spotted him. "Something's coming out of the third floor," he shouted. "It's the young man from earlier. Wait, he's going to jump." Hideki didn't hesitate. Holding the woman and baby firmly, he inhaled deeply to focus his ki. In a single, fluid motion, he launched himself outward, hoping to land on the ground. Fortunately, there was an inflatable mattress the firefighters had prepared at the base of the building, and he managed to aim for it, landing relatively gently on it. Firefighters received the mother with the baby in her arms, both unconscious due to smoke inhalation. Hideki, aware that there were still people trapped in the building, did not hesitate to return. "Wait, young man! You've done too much!" one of the firefighters shouted, reaching out to stop him. "There are still people inside," Hideki replied, dodging the firefighter without stopping. "Get the mattress ready." Once again, Hideki pushed through the flames and smoke to reach the interior of the building. He quickly climbed to the 6th floor, struggling to ignore the rising heat and the increasingly dense air. "Is anyone here?" he shouted, waiting for an answer. Finding none, he checked all the apartments as quickly as possible before continuing to the 7th floor. He shouted the same question, but again, only the sound of the fire answered. However, upon entering one of the apartments, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks: a large piece of ceiling fallen onto the floor, from which a barely visible hand protruded. Fear filled him for a moment. He hurried toward the rubble and noticed the hand moving weakly. "Help!" A faint, almost inaudible voice reached her ears. It was a man's. "Hold on! I'll get you out of here!" Hideki shouted, trying to keep the man conscious. As he tried to lift the rubble, the man muttered between coughs, "My daughter, save her." Hideki gritted his teeth and redoubled his efforts, managing to lift the heavy piece of roof a little higher. But it wasn't enough. More debris piled on the roof exerted too much pressure. Suddenly, an ominous creaking sounded. Crack! The sound of fracturing debris filled the room, causing Hideki to instinctively stop his movements. If it broke, there would be no way to save the man and his daughter, and both would be buried. And something like that, and imagine there's more rubble on top. The smoke grew thicker and thicker, burning his lungs with each breath. His muscles trembled under the strain, exhausted from the effort, as the fire began to creep dangerously closer to him. The situation worsened with every second, but at that moment, a desperate thought crossed his mind. He had no certainty whatsoever that it would work. His mastery and knowledge of Ki weren't enough to guarantee the success of his next move. However, there was no time to hesitate. Hideki closed his eyes and channeled his Ki, carefully extending it toward the piece of roof he was holding. He'd never attempted anything so precise before, but he had no choice. His energy enveloped the structure, strengthening and stabilizing it. "Hiya!" With a determined cry, Hideki exerted all his remaining strength, lifting the debris while maintaining the flow of Ki, stabilizing the structure. With one free hand, he grabbed the man, who was still clutching his daughter, and dragged them out of reach of the rubble. Once they were safely away, he dropped the heavy roof with a crash. He barely had time to breathe before making sure they were both safe. Hideki carried the wounded man and his daughter in his arms, clutching them to his chest for protection as he quickly descended the stairs. Each step was a struggle against the scorching heat and smoke that made each breath heavier than the last. When he reached the 5th floor, his path was blocked by a sudden collapse. The flames spread rapidly, licking at the walls and floor, trapping him. Hideki assessed the situation. There was no time to turn back. The only way out was the nearest window. It can't be, he thought as he approached the frame, looking down. The safety cushion the firefighters had prepared was there, but the height was considerable. His legs tensed, and doubt tried to take hold of him. He had never before jumped from such a high position with people in his arms. "Get the mattress ready!" Hideki shouted loudly, making sure everyone was ready. The wounded man coughed weakly. "Don't let us go," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Hideki took a deep breath, trying to calm his mind. He was at the limit of his endurance, but he couldn't fail now. "Hold on tight," he told them, adjusting his grip and taking a step back. He channeled what little ki he had left into his legs, strengthening them to cushion the impact of the jump. "Here I come!" he exclaimed. With a powerful surge, Hideki leaped out the window, hugging the two civilians tightly as they fell toward the safety mattress. The air whistled in his ears, and for a moment, he felt like time had stopped. The impact was hard, but the mattress absorbed most of the fall. Hideki rolled to make sure the man and his daughter didn't suffer any further damage. When he finally stopped, he breathed deeply, feeling the firm ground beneath him. "He's alive! He's got you safe!" one of the firefighters shouted, running toward them. The paramedics rushed to the injured man and his daughter, who, though weak, were still alive thanks to Hideki's efforts. He, still panting from the exertion, fell back onto the mattress, staring up at the sky. "Are you okay?" she asked between ragged breaths. "They'll be fine, thanks to you, kid," said a firefighter, who bent down to help him up. "You're a hero." Hideki shook his head as he stood up, swaying slightly. "I just did what I had to do." As Hideki stood up with Tanaka's help, a moment of silence fell over the room. The air was thick with tension as everyone came to terms with what had just happened. Then, a single clap broke the silence, followed by another and another. Within seconds, the crowd that had gathered in front of the building erupted in deafening cheers and applause. "He's a hero!" someone shouted from the crowd. "He saved that family. I can't believe it. He jumped from that height with them in his arms." The cheers intensified as reporters' cameras captured every angle of the moment. Some even approached with microphones in hand, trying to obtain a statement from the young man who had risked his life. Hideki, however, was barely listening. His heart was still pounding, not from the applause, but from the relief of having managed to save those people. He looked up at the burning building, worried that anyone else was still trapped inside. A firefighter, noticing his expression, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Easy, kid. No one else is inside." The firefighter's words gave him a small sense of calm, although exhaustion was beginning to catch up with him. "Thank you?" a woman shouted from the crowd, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for saving my husband and my daughter." Hideki turned his head and saw the woman running toward him. Her face was filled with gratitude as the paramedics treated her family. Without hesitation, he bowed deeply in respect. "No need to thank me. I'm just happy you're safe," he said humbly, though his voice was weak with exhaustion. The cheers continued, and although Hideki wasn't looking for recognition, the warmth of the crowd gave him a sense of comfort amidst all the chaos. As the applause began to fade and the firefighters resumed their work, Hideki moved away from the crowd, seeking some calm. He found a secluded corner near an ambulance, where he sank to the ground, breathing heavily as he leaned his back against the cold metal structure. Every muscle in his body ached, and fatigue wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. Despite having saved those people, an inexplicable feeling of discomfort gripped him. He had done what he had to do, yes, but there was something deeper he couldn't quite place. "I did it, but is it enough?" she asked herself, even though she knew the answer was clear inside. Today, he had faced the fire and chaos regardless of the risks, saving lives that were about to be lost. That, in his own eyes, was what a hero would do. "I guess this is what it means to be a hero," he thought with a slight smile. Yet he didn't feel like a hero because he hadn't fully understood it yet. Being a hero wasn't just about saving lives, it was about making risky decisions, about moving forward when others fell behind. And above all, it was about a constant commitment to improving, to moving forward no matter what scars one might bear. He remembered the words of the man he had rescued, "My daughter, save her." That had given him a purpose beyond any reward or recognition. He didn't do it for admiration, he did it because it was the right thing to do, because every life saved was worth more than any personal achievement. "I promise to be better. I'll keep going until no one else is trapped, until I can save everyone," he thought, his resolve stronger than before, knowing his journey as a hero was just beginning. A paramedic approached, interrupting his thoughts. "Are you all right, young man? You should let them check you out." Hideki gave a small smile and nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just give me a moment." As the paramedic walked away to get a stretcher, Hideki closed his eyes again. Despite his injuries and fatigue, Hideki already knew this was just the first step. A true hero isn't measured by how many times he falls, but by how many times he gets up, and today he had taken a giant step toward becoming the hero he'd always wanted to be. After the fire, in the following days, Hideki continued his nightly activities as a hero. His routine consisted primarily of thwarting petty thefts or helping people in dangerous situations. Japan, and especially Kuoh, was not known for its high crime rate, which meant that most of his interventions were minor incidents. However, for Hideki, every action counted, every person he could help represented one step closer to his goal of becoming a true hero. However, he began to notice something disturbing. In the midst of his patrol, he noticed an alarming pattern of disappearances. Though isolated at first, they began to accumulate in his mind like puzzle pieces that didn't fit together. People of all ages, mostly night workers, students, and transients, simply stopped appearing. The strangest thing was that almost none of these disappearances made the news or seemed to be a matter of public concern. This set off an alarm bell in Hideki. One night, after getting a couple who had been robbed to safety, he decided to change his course of action. This isn't normal, someone has to be doing something. And if no one else will do it, then I will. Hidden in the shadows of an alley, Hideki flipped through the small notebook in which he'd begun recording details of the disappearances. He'd gleaned the information through casual conversations with shopkeepers, social media reports, and small notices posted on poles or bulletin boards in neighboring communities. The disappearances seemed to be concentrated in 3 specific areas of the city: near the train station, in a park to the east, and in an abandoned industrial area. That same night, he decided to visit the park, a deserted and quiet place at that hour. His combat experience and training allowed him to remain alert to anything unusual, but it wasn't his skill that detected the first strange sign, it was his instinct. As he approached an area of dense bushes, he felt a slight chill run down his spine. He stopped and focused, sensing a faint but unmistakable trace of energy. This isn't human. He was deeply grateful that he had learned to use his ki, even if he could only use it at a basic level at the moment. Crouching down, he examined the floor more closely. There were subtle marks, as if something heavy had been dragged. He also found small stains of a dark liquid that didn't appear to be blood, but its texture and sheen in the moonlight were unsettling. This confirms my suspicions, something supernatural is behind this. As he walked through the empty streets, he felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't the first time he'd sensed something strange, but this time the trace was clearer, sharper. He closed his eyes for a moment, concentrating on his surroundings. The sensation was still difficult to decipher given his level of knowledge of ki and supernatural presences, but following his intuition and the feel of the energy, he was pretty sure it was demonic energy. After all, he'd already felt several similar energies at the academy, and one belonged to his friend Kaneko. Deep down, he denied that his friend was a demon. She could be a little cold with people, but she knew perfectly well she was a good person, so he couldn't even think she was a demon. He shook his head. It wasn't the time to think about that right now. So this isn't the work of humans, he thought, his expression hardening. The trail led him through deserted streets until he reached an old, dilapidated building. It was an abandoned theater, covered in graffiti and with broken windows, a place that had been forgotten for years. Demonic energy seemed to emanate from it, growing stronger as he approached. Hidden in the shadows, Hideki studied the place. There were no signs of human activity, but the oppressive feeling of the place was undeniable. He approached cautiously, keeping all his senses alert. The main entrance was locked with a rusty padlock, but Hideki found a side entrance. A small, half-open door led to what appeared to be a dark hallway. Inside, the atmosphere was cold and heavy, as if the air itself was charged with something unnatural. As he advanced, the demonic energy marks became more evident. The same claws he had seen in the park were etched on the walls, forming a pattern that resembled an incomplete seal. Every step he took convinced him more that he wasn't dealing with something ordinary. He investigated a little more, but found nothing. The biggest clue he had obtained were the claw marks and the demonic energy that was strongly concentrated in the place. I don't think the demon doing this will be back anytime soon. I'll come back tomorrow to investigate further. Hideki clenched his fists, his mind racing. He knew that taking on a rogue demon would be a far greater challenge than the petty criminals he'd stopped so far. Still, he couldn't allow more people to fall victim. With that determination, Hideki began to inspect the area more closely, devising a plan to confront whatever was behind the disappearances. For now, his priority was to gather as much information as possible before the time came to confront his enemy, Sona Citri, student council president of the prestigious Kuoh Academy. A beautiful young woman with short black hair and violet eyes, she is known for maintaining order within the institution with a firm hand. Her strict and demanding personality has earned her the respect and even fear of students and teachers alike. At first glance, Sona seems like the exemplary student, dedicated, disciplined, and completely focused on her studies and personal aspirations. And although all of the above is completely true, the hidden truth of the girl is that she belongs to the proud race of demons, and on top of that she is heiress of one of the most important clans of the underworld, the Citri clan. With this it is deducible that the surname Citri is only a cover for her true nature, and her real name is Sona Citri. Since childhood, Sona has shared a close friendship with Rias Gremory. They both support each other and are great rivals, sharing a natural competitiveness that drives them to constantly surpass themselves. However, there is a fundamental difference between them. While Rias seeks power, following the more traditional impulses of demonic nature, Sona prefers to act with caution and strategy. This prudence has made her a brilliant strategist, capable of deeply analyzing her opponents and staying informed of everything happening around her, even if it is unrelated to the supernatural. It is precisely this strategic curiosity combined with the greedy nature of demons that draws Sona's attention to a certain human teenager, who at first glance seems completely ordinary. "He's a hero!" came the excited cry of a voice on the news. "He saved that family. I can't believe it. He jumped from that height with them in his arms." On the screen, a reporter excitedly announced, "This is truly impressive. A young teenager just rescued 4 people from a burning building, when even firefighters were hesitant to enter due to the structure's instability." According to witnesses, the young man jumped from the 5th floor carrying the victims in his arms. Without a doubt, it is an act of bravery and recklessness. The camera focused on the hero of the day, a young man with slightly long brown hair tied back in a ponytail and blue eyes. His face and Kuoh Academy uniform were covered in soot and showed some minor burns. The reporter tried to approach him for an interview, but before she could speak, paramedics surrounded him to provide medical attention. Although his body showed signs of exhaustion from the exertion and the smoke he inhaled, his expression reflected unwavering determination. As the dedicated student council president, known for her dedication to keeping everything in perfect order, Sona almost immediately identified the young protagonist of the heroic act that had captured everyone's attention. "Hideki Saito," she murmured to herself, her mind racing over the few, yet memorable, interactions she'd had with him. Hideki was, outwardly, a completely normal human. She had never sensed any kind of supernatural energy in him, and when she investigated his profile when he enrolled at the academy, she found no signs of a connection to the supernatural world. For that reason, Sona didn't pay much attention to him beyond what was necessary. However, she couldn't ignore certain details. He had entered the academy with a scholarship thanks to his effort and dedication, and his grades placed him just below the best students at Kuoh. Specifically, he ranked 5th, behind Sona, Rias, Tsubaki, and Akino, in that order. Hideki was known for his kind heart, always willing to help anyone in need, no matter who they were. On more than one occasion, Sona had heard comments from her servant, Tsubasa Yura, about how Hideki had helped her with simple tasks, such as carrying documents to the student council room. That kindness had forged a small friendship between the two, something Sona hadn't given much thought to. For her part, Sona's interactions with Hideki had been few and strictly related to academic or disciplinary matters. She particularly remembered one occasion that, although insignificant, had proved curiously memorable. Hideki had gotten lost at the academy during his first few days and, upon running into Sona by chance, asked her for help finding his classroom. The curious thing was that, after wandering around the halls several times, Hideki didn't realize they were right in front of the classroom in question when he asked for directions. That anecdote brought a slight smile to her face as she recalled it. Although until now she had considered him a normal boy, recent events had sparked a new curiosity in Sona. What could motivate someone like him to risk so much for others? The next day at the academy, Hideki was surrounded by his classmates, who showered him with questions and congratulations, clearly impressed by his heroic act. "You're amazing, Hideki. You really jumped from the 5th floor with those people in your arms?" a boy asked, his voice full of amazement. "Weren't you afraid the building would collapse?" one of the girls added, staring at him with wide eyes. "You should be a firefighter or something." Hideki, visibly uncomfortable with so much attention, raised a hand trying to calm the commotion. "It wasn't that bad, really," he replied modestly, scratching the back of his neck. His tone reflected more embarrassment than pride. "I just did what anyone would have done in that situation." "That's not true. Most people wouldn't even have entered the building, let alone jumped out with other people in tow," another student protested. Amidst all the commotion, a familiar figure watched from a distance. Sona Citri, accompanied by her faithful vice president Tsubaki Shinra, studied the boy intently while adjusting her glasses. "Tell me, Tsubaki, what can you sense about Hideki Saidakin?" Sona asked calmly as she observed the boy from a safe distance. She had considered approaching him and speaking to him directly about the events of the previous day, but something about him caught her attention, something that hadn't been present before. Before acting, she decided to confirm her suspicions and test her queen's perception. Tsubaki took a moment to respond, frowning slightly as she analyzed the young man. "To tell you the truth, Kaicho, I don't feel anything special about him," he finally replied, his tone calm but slightly confused. Sona maintained her calm expression, though inside she couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. She didn't entirely blame Tsubaki after all, what she noticed wasn't obvious. However, she hoped her queen would display a greater level of perception. You still have a lot to learn, Tsubaki," Sona commented, adjusting her glasses with a flourish before revealing what she'd discovered. "You probably wouldn't have noticed because of Hideki's human nature. But he possesses quite a powerful ki for a mere human." Tsubaki opened her eyes slightly, surprised by her president's statement. "Ki? You mean the energy that yokai usually use?" she asked, intrigued. Sona nodded. "Exactly. As you know, any being, whether human or supernatural, has the ability to use ki. However, it is not common for humans to develop such strong ki, especially without proper training. Even among supernaturals, its use is not common. Beings like us generally prefer to rely on magic, which is more versatile and allows for a wider variety of strategies and attacks." Tsubaki absorbed the explanation, recalling exceptional figures like Serorg Baal, a demon who had mastered the use of ki due to his limited magical ability. Even so, it was even rarer to find humans with such mastery of this energy. "But what really catches my attention," Sona continued, her gaze fixed on Hideki as she spoke in a lower tone, "is that this amount of ki wasn't present in him a few weeks ago. And what's even more interesting, he's trying to hide it." Sona's calculated tone left Tsubaki thoughtful. If Hideki had developed a significant amount of ki in such a short time, and was also trying to hide it, it meant there was much more to him than met the eye. "Tsubaki, look up all the recent information on him. I want to review his history one more time," Sona ordered calmly, as she returned to her office. Hideki walked through the halls of Kuoh Academy with a stack of documents in his arms, barely managing to balance them as he followed Tsubasa Yura. The young woman, a member of the student council, was carrying a large pile of documents, and Hideki, seeing her, didn't hesitate to offer her help. "Thanks for the help, Saidakin. These documents are heavier than they look," Yura said, giving him a small smile. "Don't worry, Tsubasa-san. It's the least I can do." Besides, I was already on my way here, Hideki replied in his usual kind tone. And I've told you before, call me Hideki. Sure, Hideki-san, she answered with an almost imperceptible blush on her face. The girl really appreciated Hideki's help. When they reached the door to the student council room, Yura opened it to allow her to enter. You can leave them on that table, he said, pointing to an empty space near the main desk. Hideki nodded and headed over, carefully setting down the documents. It was then that he noticed an unexpected presence. Oh, Saito-kun. What a surprise to see you here. The firm and calm voice of Sona Citri, student council president, caught his attention. Hideki quickly straightened, turning to her with an expression of slight surprise. Ah, Shitori Kaishu, excuse me for intruding. I was just helping Tsubase-san with these documents, he said, bowing his head slightly in respect. As he spoke, a peculiar feeling came over him. This presence, I've felt it before, he thought, looking at both Yura and Sona. Their auras are similar to the one I sensed in the park yesterday. Could it be that they're also demons? Ever since Hideki began developing his ability to sense supernatural presences through his ki, he noticed that the academy was filled with them. However, his inexperience still made it difficult for him to accurately identify who they belonged to unless he was standing directly in front of the person. Sona watched him for a moment, adjusting her glasses with an elegant gesture. It's not intruding if you're helping, Saito-kun, she replied politely, though her analytical gaze seemed to scan him completely. It's good to see you're showing a willingness to cooperate. However, she approached slowly, maintaining impeccable posture as she looked at him more closely. Have you been okay since the fire incident? After all, you were absent for 2 days. Hideki blinked, surprised by the question. Are you referring to the fire? Yes, I'm fine. The paramedics checked me out and said I didn't have anything serious, just some minor burns. Thanks for your concern, Shitori Kaishu, she replied with a slight smile. That makes me happy, Sona replied, though her tone remained measured and professional. However, I can't help but wonder what drove you to act that way. Jumping from a 5th-floor apartment with a family in your arms isn't something just anyone can do. It's admirable, but also risky. Hideki seemed uncomfortable with the attention, scratching the back of his neck as he tried to respond. Well, I didn't think much about it at the time. I just wanted to help. I couldn't just stand idly by while someone was in danger, she said sincerely. Sona kept her gaze fixed on him, as if trying to decipher something beyond his words. I understand. That's an interesting answer, he commented, before turning to Yura. Yura, thank you for the documents. You may go. I'll take care of Saito-kun. Yura blinked, surprised by the decision, but said nothing and left the room, leaving Sona and Hideki alone. Saito-kun, would you mind staying a few more minutes? There's something I want to discuss with you, Sona said, taking a seat at her desk and folding her hands on top of it. Sure, Shitori-san. What's it about? Sona watched him silently for a moment before speaking. The act you performed yesterday was extraordinary. But I can't help but wonder, how did you accomplish something like that, being, as far as I know, an ordinary student? Is there something I should know, Saito-kun? Hideki swallowed, feeling the intensity in Sona's violet eyes. While the question sounded polite, it also indicated that the president wouldn't let this matter go so easily. Hideki was momentarily silent, struggling to find the right words. Sona's gaze was penetrating, but not aggressive. She seemed more interested in understanding him than in directly confronting him. There's not much to tell, Shitori Kaishu, he finally said, scratching the back of his neck. I just acted. I don't think it's anything extraordinary. I just did what I felt was right. Sona watched him intently for a few more seconds before rising from her seat. She walked over to a nearby shelf, where a neatly arranged chessboard was placed. Well, let's put that aside. Do you play chess, Saito-kun? He asked, taking out the board and placing it on the student council table. Ah, well, yeah, a little. I used to play with my grandfather. He taught me when I was a kid, but I'm not very good, Hideki replied, looking at the board curiously. By the way, Shitori Keiku, please call me Hideki. Perfect. Let's play a game while we talk, and there's no problem, Hideki-kun, Sona said calmly. While preparing the board, Hideki smiled when he noticed that the girl had no problem calling him by his name. Hideki sat down across from her, still a little nervous about the situation, but grateful that the conversation wasn't too formal. You go first, Hideki-kun, Sona said, turning the board so Hideki could play with the white pieces. Hideki moved a pawn forward, breaking the ice. So what did you want to talk about, Shitori Kaishu? Sona moved her pawn with precision and looked at it with a questioning, but not intimidating, look. Nothing complicated. I just wanted to know more about you. After all, we don't usually talk beyond academic matters. Where do you come from, Hideki-kun? Hideki took his horse and moved it, thoughtfully. I'm from Asuka, Nara Prefecture. Hideki remembered how Kaori had helped him with the paperwork in this world, and that when he told her he had spent some time in Osaka for his training, she had chosen a nearby town for his registration. And what brought you to this academy? Hideki shrugged as Sona moved her bishop with precision. I wanted to take advantage of the scholarship. I've always been someone who tries to do my best, and when I had the opportunity to come here, I didn't want to pass it up. Plus, I heard the academy has an excellent educational level. Sona nodded, interested. That explains your grades. You're among the top students, and that's not an easy thing to achieve, especially with the demands of this academy. Do you have any goals for the future? Hideki sighed, moving his rook and losing himself in thought for a moment. I guess I want to do something meaningful. I'm not sure what exactly yet, but I want to help people, somehow. Sona smiled faintly, moving her queen and taking a piece from Hideki. It's a noble goal. Although, from what I've seen, you already help those around you. I heard you offered to help Yura with some documents this morning, and it's not the first time you've done something like this. Hideki laughed softly, somewhat embarrassed. I'm just trying to be helpful. I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary. Sona moved another piece and looked directly at him. Don't underestimate the importance of small acts, Hideki-kun. Sometimes the simplest actions have a greater impact than we imagine. Hideki, although a little intimidated by her thoughtful tone, decided to change the subject slightly. Have you always been this good at chess, Shitori Kaishu? Let's just say I've had a lot of practice, Sona replied with a slight smile. It's good exercise for the mind. But back to you, how's the academy going? Have you had any trouble adjusting? Hideki moved a piece, clearly thinking about his response. Well, it was difficult at first. Coming from a small town to a place like this was a big change. But I've met some kind people who have helped me. Yura, for example, is a great friend, even though we've only spoken a couple of times. Sona nodded, making a mental note of his words. That's good to hear. Maintaining good relationships is just as important as academic performance. The game continued for a few more minutes, with Sona clearly in the lead. Every calculated move by the president seemed to close one door after another on the board. Despite her efforts, Hideki made mistakes, which she exploited with precision. Tell me, Hideki-kun, what can you tell me about your parents? Sona asked casually, though her gaze seemed more inquisitive. Hideki let out a heavy sigh before answering, his expression turning more serious. I don't really know much about them. They abandoned me when I was 4. I was raised by an old man who adopted me shortly after. I always considered him my grandfather even though he's no longer with us. He'd chosen to keep his story short, omitting unnecessary details. Since he was no longer in their world, talking about his grandfather as someone deceased was easier than trying to explain his current situation. Sona listened to him silently, her expression softening as she absorbed what he said. I understand. It must have been very difficult for you, losing the only family you had, she said empathetically. Then, after a brief pause, she added, have you never been curious to know more about your biological parents? Hideki was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the board as he almost mechanically advanced a bishop, leaving the king exposed. I can't deny that it was like that at first, he finally admitted, but I soon realized they meant nothing to me. I stopped looking for them. His tone hardened as he said this, reflecting the mix of emotions he still harbored. He remembered the moment his biological parents had sought him out after the sports festival, wanting him to join their hero agency. The decision to ignore them had been painful, but necessary for him. Sona noticed the change in his tone and leaned forward slightly, apologetic. Sorry. That must have been a very delicate question. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, he said sincerely. Then, in an attempt to steer the topic away, he cautiously continued, May I know who you're living with now? Hideki looked up at her, clearly exhausted from the interrogation. He didn't feel Sona was a bad person, but she was digging too deep into his past. Add to that the growing certainty that she was a demon, and he decided he didn't want to share anymore. "Excuse me, Shitorikeku," he said abruptly, rising from his seat. "I appreciate your hospitality, but I believe I've already taken up too much of your time." Sona blinked, surprised by his sudden reaction, but showed no signs of annoyance. Instead, she smiled calmly and nodded. "I understand, Hideki-kun. Thank you for joining me for the game. I hope we can talk again another time." Hideki bowed his head slightly before heading toward the door, feeling the weight of their conversation as he walked away. As he stepped outside, he noticed Yura still waiting for him outside, apparently finished with her chores. "Is everything okay, Hideki-kun?" she asked in a friendly tone. "Yes, thank you for waiting for me, Tsubasa-san," he replied with a smile, as if the previous conversation had never happened. As they walked away from the council chamber, Hideki couldn't shake the fact that Sona knew more than she let on. His intuition told him this wouldn't be the last time they spoke, and that he should prepare for more questions in the future. Inside the room, Sona looked at the chessboard, where her pieces were still perfectly positioned. Sona was only one move away from checkmate, though looking more closely, Hideki's last pawn was only one square away from reaching the enemy base, and if it had become a queen, it would have left Sona in check. Not that it mattered much, since the next turn was the girl's. "Interesting boy," she muttered to herself before adjusting her glasses, carefully moving her remaining rook and trapping Hideki's king, ending in a checkmate and victory for the demon. It felt like she was falling down an endless pit, enveloped in the deepest darkness. As she fell, time and space seemed to lose meaning. She didn't know how long she'd been in that abyss, or if she'd ever find an end. Vertigo churned her stomach, and her mind couldn't process what was happening. But then, suddenly, she felt a sharp blow on her back. Bam! With a groan of pain, his body hit the pavement. The dull sound of the impact echoed in his ears, followed by the thunder of rain pounding the ground around him. He slowly sat up, dazed and in pain, trying to get his bearings. He looked around a dark, deserted city, lit only by the faint glow of a few distant streetlights. The sky was covered with black clouds, and the rain fell with relentless intensity, soaking his body instantly. He was still wearing his hero's suit, made of a reinforced black material designed to be lightweight and agile. On his belt were a few gadgets, like retractable grappling hooks and smoke bombs, but not many supplies, as his original mission hadn't required that much equipment. The cold metal of his provisional hero license remained in one of the compartments, reminding him of who he was and how far he'd come. Every muscle in his body ached. He felt a constant pressure in his head, as if someone were squeezing his skull tightly. The stabbing pain spread through his limbs, making it difficult to even stand. The rain, far from relieving him, only intensified his discomfort. The cold water soaked his suit and hair, and each drop seemed to hit his skin like a tiny needle. Hideki took a deep breath, trying to ease the pain and clear his mind. This was all confusing. Where was he? How had he gotten there? He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of uncertainty. He had no answers, but he knew he couldn't stay there much longer. He had to find shelter, or at least figure out what kind of world he'd landed on. With one last glance around, Hideki began walking, his footsteps echoing on the empty streets as the rain continued to fall relentlessly, covering the world around him in a heavy curtain of water. Morning arrived with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the scattered clouds, gently touching Hideki's face. His body, still aching from the impact of the previous night and the cold pavement he'd slept on, reacted with a creak as he stood up and stretched. He'd spent the night under a bridge, seeking shelter from the rain, though he hadn't avoided the cold or the discomfort. With a sigh, Hideki shook off the remaining drops of moisture on his hero's suit, and the first thing he did was decide to return to the place where he had fallen the night before. Perhaps there he could find some clue, something that would give him an idea of what was happening or where he was. As he walked, he noticed something strange about the city. Not only was it the fact that he didn't recognize the place, but everything seemed different. The streets didn't have the bustle or the atmosphere he was used to in Muzurufu. It was as if the city wasn't at the same technological level, simpler, older in a sense. The buildings weren't as tall or as modern, and the infrastructure, while functional, didn't seem to have the same sophistication he was used to seeing. Even the vehicles on the streets seemed more antiquated. What caught his attention most was the way people were looking at him. Not with admiration or recognition, but with curiosity and even distrust. Their gazes fell on his hero's suit, and several passers-by whispered among themselves as he walked. Receiving attention wasn't new to him, but in this case, he felt uncomfortable, as if he didn't belong there. Even stranger, the stillness of the streets was unsettling. At this time of day, Muzidafu would be bustling with activity, heroes on patrol, villains causing trouble, and citizens rushing about their daily routines. Yet here he saw no heroes in sight, nor did he hear sirens or warnings of villain attacks. Everything was absurdly quiet, almost too quiet for his liking. Finally, he reached the spot where he had fallen the night before. He examined the street carefully, hoping to find something out of the ordinary, some indication of his arrival or a sign of how he had ended up there. But what he found was nothing. The street was like any other, the pavement was intact, with no signs of his fall, and the surroundings were undisturbed. He crouched down to take a closer look, running his hand along the ground as if that would reveal some hidden clue. But there was nothing. Frustrated, he stood up and crossed his arms, looking around once more, trying to make sense of the situation. What the hell is going on here? He muttered to himself, gritting his teeth. Hideki sighed, feeling a mixture of frustration and confusion. Not only hadn't he found any clues, but everything around him seemed completely ordinary. But something inside him told him he wasn't in his own world, and that whatever had brought him here wasn't going to be easy to understand. Looking around once more, he decided that staying in one place wasn't going to give him answers. Even with his body aching from the fall and the rough night, he knew he had to move. Further exploring the place might help him find something or someone who could explain where he was. However, there was something else on his mind. He was dressed in his hero's suit, something that was clearly attracting attention and might not be the wisest thing to do in an unfamiliar place. I should find some normal clothes, she thought as she looked at the people around her. The clothes they wore seemed simpler, without the technology or flashy designs one would see in her world. Hideki set off, his senses alert, taking in the details around him. Not far away, he saw what appeared to be a local market. Shops were lined up along a narrow street, and vendors had already begun setting up shop. He headed there, hoping to find something useful. As he walked through the market, the bustle of the city began to increase. Vendors hawked their wares, and conversations intertwined with the sound of footsteps and the movement of goods. Despite the increased activity, Hideki noticed something strange. He didn't see anyone who seemed to have any special powers or abilities. In Muzidafu or anywhere else in the world, there was always someone with a striking quirk or using their power to perform everyday tasks. But here nothing. Finally, she came across a stall selling modest, somewhat dated, but functional clothing. Without hesitation, she decided to buy a couple of items. While browsing through the options, she overheard a conversation nearby. "Did you see that weird guy last night?" He seemed to have appeared out of nowhere like he had fallen from the sky, an older woman murmured next to her, talking to a vendor. Hideki froze for a second, his hands still on the clothes he was examining. He turned slowly, paying closer attention. "Yeah, I saw him. It was dark, but I swear he was wearing some kind of weird outfit. He looks like he's doing cosplay or something," the vendor said, clearly intrigued but also suspicious. Hideki frowned, realizing that people were interpreting his hero costume as cosplay. Apparently, in this world, it wasn't common to see real hero costumes, only costumes for events or entertainment. This explained why he was getting so many curious looks. He decided not to intervene in the conversation. It wasn't the time to ask questions. He walked away from the stall in his new clothes, looking for a place where he could change, and as he did so, his mind continued to process what he had heard. This world, though seemingly peaceful, might be hiding more than it showed on the surface. Once he changed into his new clothes, something simpler and less conspicuous, he decided to go his own way. He didn't know exactly what he should do, but one thing was clear: he couldn't stay still. He had to find answers, and he had to do it fast. Hideki woke up to the sound of his cell phone alarm, a constant reminder of his daily routines. He slowly sat up, his thoughts still wrapped in the recurring dream he'd had, one that reminded him of his arrival in this world. Although several months had passed since he arrived, the memory of his arrival was still fresh in his mind. During that time, he had made significant progress in his training. He was now able to use his ki at a basic level, which gave him a sense of accomplishment and control. Along with ki training, he had maintained his physical exercise routine, pushing himself to the limit as he used to in his previous world. Although he tried not to rely on ki during these workouts, sometimes he couldn't help but use it to further improve his skills. Feeling this improvement in his abilities filled him with joy and motivation. When he used ki, he pushed himself even further, enjoying the challenge it offered. One of the times he focused most on using his ki was while practicing katas from various martial arts. These practices not only helped him perfect his technique but also control the flow of his ki, integrating power with his movements in a fluid and natural manner. During this month, Hideki had also bonded with Kaneko. The calm and satisfaction he'd experienced with his new routine had led him to be more open and approachable. They spent more time together at the academy, and Hideki appreciated the younger girl's company, finding in her a sincere and selfless friendship. He had also spent time with Kyome, telling her about his training and the person guiding him. Kyome's joy at his progress showed her support and understanding, and they had enjoyed time together both inside and outside the academy. These moments together had helped Hideki adapt better to his new surroundings and feel more at home. As the morning began, Hideki prepared for his daily routine. He took a quick shower and put on his training clothes. As he dressed, his thoughts wandered to his accomplishments and the future. He knew there was still a long way to go, but the determination and discipline he had learned continued to drive him. Isay had had a week he couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. The perverted young man's usual routine of spying on the academy's girls and avoiding two of the most outstanding students, Kiba Yudo and Hideki Saito, had been dramatically shaken up. Kiba and Hideki, with their charisma and skills, captured the attention of almost all the girls. Isay disliked Hideki even more because they shared a classroom. The week took an unexpected turn when a girl from another academy, Yuma Amano, proposed to him. Isay, inexperienced in relationships and desperate for a girlfriend, accepted without much thought. However, Yuma turned out to be a fallen angel, sent to assassinate him due to the threat his sacred gear could pose in the future. This revelation ended with Isay's death. But the story didn't end there. Isay was reincarnated as a demon in the service of Rias Gremory, the scarlet-haired young woman who had always been his crush. The unexpected didn't end with his reincarnation. A few days later, Isay was attacked again by a fallen angel. Although he was injured, his biggest surprise was waking up the next day to find Rias naked in his bed. Stunned and confused, Isay listened to Rias explain the recent events and her new life in the demon world. Despite his recent death and transformation, Isay found a new opportunity to be close to Rias, who, after his last attack, explained to him everything about the supernatural world and his new role as a devil. As Rias shared information about her role in Isay's new life and the supernatural world, he had to come to terms with the truth behind his reincarnation and his connection to the beings he had met. The reality of his situation began to sink in, and as he struggled to understand his new role, Isay faced the challenge of balancing his life as a young devil in a world filled with dangers and unexpected opportunities. Which brings us to the present. Isay was taking his usual morning walk to the academy, deep in thought about the recent turn in his life. He had gone from a pervert with dreams of a girlfriend to a demon in training, and his mind was filled with the confusion and astonishment this change had brought him. By the end of the day, Isay, believing himself to be alone in the club, was organizing some pamphlets as part of his new duties as a reincarnated devil, aimed at forming contracts with humans to increase the reputation of the Gremory family. Just then, Rias entered the room to announce that they had been given a mission to eliminate a rogue devil. The news took Isay by surprise, and although he was still coming to terms with his new life as a devil, he knew that missions and danger were now part of his reality. Once everyone was gathered, Kiba explained to Isay that a rogue demon was a former servant who had betrayed his master, even going so far as to kill him in some cases. These types of demons, now free of all control, posed a dangerous threat. While Kiba explained more details, The group was transported by a magic circle to their destination. We're going to an abandoned house. They say a rogue demon lures people there and eats them, Akino commented calmly as she looked at the sinister house they were about to enter. Isay felt a chill as he saw the place, knowing that his new life as a devil faced unimaginable dangers. But he also knew that he now had a responsibility within the Gremory family, and he couldn't fail. 2 more nights passed, and Hideki, true to his resolve, continued investigating the abandoned theater. However, his efforts bore no immediate fruit. The demon had not manifested itself during those 2 nights, and the traces found provided nothing conclusive. Despite the lack of progress, Hideki wasn't willing to give up so easily. On the 3rd night, with the same resolve as always, he returned to the theater. Something about the atmosphere had been different since the moment he arrived. The air seemed thicker, and that oppressive sense of demonic energy he'd felt before was now much more intense, as if something were calling out to him directly. Tonight will be different. The air was thick, almost unbreathable, and every step he took toward the theater made his skin crawl. Cautiously, he approached, trying to make sure his target was really inside. Dressed in his hero costume, Hideki moved through the shadows with the agility and stealth he had honed over years of practice, determined to face whatever awaited him inside. Hideki reached the 2nd floor with feline agility, entering through a window with perfected stealth. He moved cautiously, searching for the person responsible for the horrific events in the abandoned theater. After meticulously exploring the 2nd floor without finding anything, he decided to descend to the 1st. As soon as her feet touched the ground after the last step, a seductive and ominous voice emerged from the shadows. I smell something delicious. Is it sweet? Is it bitter? A woman's distorted voice echoed in the air. Hideki tensed as he noticed a figure who, while appearing to be a beautiful, naked woman on top, emanated a disturbing presence. His instincts told him he was in danger, and he quickly took a battle stance, holding a kunai in each hand and concentrating his ki. Unfortunately, Hideki didn't have his signature staff, which he lost before coming to this world, but he still had some kunai and shuriken in his suit. A human, the woman said, emerging fully from the shadows. Though her upper half was that of a beautiful woman, from the waist down, her body resembled that of a manticore. You've been doing too much research, human. You're not prepared for what you're about to face here. The monster woman seemed to recognize Hideki, clearly noticing his investigation into her actions. Hideki, prepared for a dangerous confrontation, felt the pressure of facing an unknown threat. I'm going to stop you, Hideki said firmly, and protect those who have been affected by your actions. I won't let you cause any more harm. The figure laughed maliciously, a laugh that echoed ominously in the room. Very well then. Let's see if you can handle what you've found. The air thickened, and Hideki braced himself for the impending confrontation. The monster woman began to touch herself lasciviously, and small magic circles appeared on her nipples. Bang! 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 Suddenly, several gunshots rang out, as flashes of light shot out at incredible speed toward Hideki. With agile movements, he dodged the attack, surprised to see how the shots melted the walls where they hit. Hideki dodged the flashes of light with agility, his movements precise and swift as the wind. The monster woman, seeing that her first attack had failed, frowned in fury. Instead of being paralyzed by failure, the monster prepared for a new attack, its body twisting with unexpected agility. Hideki moved forward with determination, but before he could throw his first kunai, the monster woman conjured a magical barrier that deflected his attack. The barrier became visible as a layer of black energy, blocking the kunai with flashes of light. The creature laughed in a distorted voice as the dark aura around its body intensified. Did you think that would be enough, human? The creature muttered, its eyes flashing with malevolence. Hideki, adjusting his strategy, decided to use the environment to his advantage. He quickly moved to a corner of the room, trying to avoid the next spell the monster woman was preparing. As he moved, he threw a kunai at one of the nearby bookshelves, causing several objects to fall, blocking the creature's line of sight. The monster woman grew irritated at the obstruction of her vision, and suddenly cast a darkness spell that enveloped the room in a black mist. Trapped in the darkness, Hideki had to rely on his senses beyond sight. The mist made his surroundings indistinct and hampered his ability to gauge the distance and angle of his attacks. While trying to get his bearings, Hideki heard the creature's whisper approaching. With a swift movement, he used his ki to clear a small area of mist, partially revealing the monster's figure. However, the monster woman had already launched another attack, balls of dark energy that flew at high speed. Hideki barely had time to dodge them, one of which grazed his arm and caused a stabbing pain. Desperate to find an opening, Hideki moved quickly, using his training to anticipate the creature's movements. With a rapid succession of movements, he threw kunai at the monster woman's joints, but his attacks were intercepted by the energy shields the creature generated in the blink of an eye. The now partially visible monster woman let out a scream of rage and launched an attack of dark tentacles from her lower torso, extending with surprising speed. Hideki had to move nimbly to dodge the tentacles seeking to ensnare him. Despite his efforts, one of the tentacles managed to catch his leg and knocked him to the ground. With his leg trapped and feeling the pain, Hideki was forced to use an advanced evasion technique. He focused his ki on his arms and performed a series of rapid movements to sever the tentacle holding him down. Finally, with a final effort, he managed to free himself and stood up, still reeling from the impact of the attack. The fight intensified as the monster woman increased the speed of her attacks. Hideki, aware of the growing threat, had to employ a more elaborate strategy. He circled the monster, trying to confuse it. At one key moment, he made a powerful leap toward a wall, twirled in the air, and touched the wall with his feet, propelling himself at high speed beneath the enormous creature. Skillfully sliding beneath it, he surrounded his kunai with a significant amount of ki, seeking to make his attack effective. The kunai tore into the belly of the manticore possessing the monster, but the attack did not go deep enough to significantly weaken the creature due to the weapon's short length. Observing the attack, Hideki noticed that the monster's human half was avoiding him, quickly deducing that it was its weak point. He checked his case and saw that only the kunai he was holding remained, the others were buried in the monster's hide. Just then, a sudden attack from the monster's tail struck him, sending him brutally slamming into a wall. Hideki twisted his body in the air, narrowly dodging a second attack that shattered the wall he'd been standing on. He staggered to his feet, knowing he needed a plan to overcome the demon. Determined not to give up, Hideki concentrated his ki to the maximum, knowing that only a risky attack could give him victory. The monster launched a direct attack with one of its claws, and Hideki made a powerful leap, reaching about 3 meters in the air to dodge the blow. He landed on the monster's arm and ran toward its human half, using all his remaining energy to maintain the necessary speed. With one last kunai in hand, Hideki threw it at the monster woman's face. Although she blocked the kunai with her human arm, that moment of distraction was what Hideki had been waiting for. He focused all his ki on his arms and approached the monster's human half. He delivered a methodical and precise attack, a left jab to the jaw to disorient her, followed by a right cross that intensified the impact, and a left hook to the ribs, feeling the crunch beneath his fist. Then, he prepared his best attack, a move he'd only seen his master use once before, Vital Strike. Every muscle in his body tensed briefly before relaxing. He focused all his remaining ki into his right arm and threw his right fist with devastating power directly into the monster woman's stomach. The blow buried itself deep, causing the woman to vomit a large amount of blood, splattering Hideki in the process. The attack he'd used was Gutaijutsu, a technique that required the fighter to tense their body to the maximum at the moment of impact. When executed correctly, the fist strikes with the full weight of the body, making it one of the most destructive attacks in his arsenal, and combined with ki, the attack was even more powerful. Hideki had practiced this technique tirelessly, and tonight, he put it into action with an effort and precision that reflected all his training. The devastating blow left the monster woman reeling, her entire body shuddering with the impact. The force of the Gutaijutsu had penetrated deeply, causing blood to spurt from her mouth and causing her to stagger, trying to regain her balance. Even though the attack was devastating, the creature hadn't been completely brought down. Its fury increased, and its movements became even more erratic and violent. As Hideki stepped back to prepare for a possible counterattack, the monster woman lunged at him with renewed fury. Her tail, which moved with surprising agility, lashed out dangerously. Hideki narrowly dodged, but the impact of the close attack sent debris and dust flying across the room, obscuring his vision and making him vulnerable to unexpected attacks. The monster, wounded but still extremely dangerous, launched a series of rapid, uncontrolled attacks, combining claws and tail in a flurry of movements. Hideki, forced to maintain his focus, moved swiftly and nimbly, dodging as best he could to maintain a safe distance. In a moment of desperation, the monster woman launched a frontal charge with impressive force. Hideki, anticipating the attack, made a quick turn to dodge, but his movement was intercepted by a swift sweep of her tail that threw him against the wall, leaving him stunned and on the ground. Breathing heavily, Hideki struggled to compose himself. His muscles were tense and sore, the impact of the recent attacks exhausting him, draining every ounce of his ki. However, he knew he couldn't give up. His willpower was the only thing keeping him going. Despite the overwhelming fatigue, he raised both fists, determined not to give up without giving his all. His body trembling and his mind growing increasingly confused, Hideki felt his consciousness fading. His eyes clouded and rolled back, his body unresponsive. He stood there, motionless, staring blankly into space, completely unconscious but still standing. Boom! Crash! A white flash slammed into the monster, throwing it violently against the wall. Moments earlier, Rias Gremory and her entourage had arrived at the abandoned house after receiving a report about a rogue demon wreaking havoc. The group cautiously approached the scene, prepared to face any dangerous situation. However, as they approached, a loud crash startled them. Peeking carefully through several broken walls, they were able to observe what was happening inside. A strange man wearing an unusual outfit, a kind of modern, lightweight armor, was fighting intensely against the rogue demon. The group soon realized that the stranger was a human, and most surprisingly, he was using ki, although Kaneko was the only one who noticed that his use was basic. The fight seemed to be nearing its climax. Observers watched as the man executed a tremendous combo of ki-charged blows to the monster's human half, seemingly managing to land a decisive blow. However, their surprise grew when they saw that, despite continuing to vomit blood, the monster attacked in a desperate last act, clearly about to faint from lack of blood. Despite his efforts, the man was unable to avoid the attack and was brutally thrown against the wall through which the Gremory clan group was watching. Kaneko realized two things. First, that the man's key signature was strikingly similar to that of a friend of hers, and second, that the man's scent confirmed her suspicions. Hideki-senpai! She screamed in her mind. It was her friend and senpai, Hideki Saito, who was in mortal danger. Without hesitation, Kaneko charged forward, moving with surprising speed even for Kiba. She passed through the hole in the wall through which they had been watching, and with renewed strength, delivered a devastating blow to the monster. Her attack caused the rogue demon to stagger, further weakening the creature. Approaching Hideki, Kaneko was surprised to see that, despite his critical condition, he was still standing, his guard up, trying to remain alert. A strange sense of danger coming from Hideki caused her to stop momentarily, but not before looking around in concern. Her face paled as she realized that Hideki wasn't completely out of danger yet. She knew the battle was over, but at least, for now, they had managed to save Hideki and quell the threat looming over the city. Rias and the rest of the group rushed in, prepared to finish off the monster and ensure the subject's safety. But the impact of Kaneko's blow was so powerful that the monster fell to the ground, already dead. With the threat contained, Rias and her entourage quickly approached the man, who lay unconscious and gravely injured. Isay was the first to speak, his shock evident after what he had just witnessed. The scene had been so shocking that he hadn't yet realized the unconscious man in front of them was a normal human. That was surprising, he commented, still stunned. Is he part of Rias Butch's clan? He asked, genuinely curious as he approached the unconscious man. Is she unconscious? His surprise grew as he saw that the man was standing but clearly unconscious, and he was about to move closer when an arm stopped him before he could enter the man's range. Don't come any closer, Kaneko warned firmly, her gaze fixed on Hideki. Isay, confused, looked at the man's face. He felt that he looked familiar, but the mask covering part of his face prevented him from fully identifying him. Why? Isay asked, incredulous. He wanted to help, but Kaneko's gesture puzzled him. He's hurt. We need to help him as soon as possible, Isay said, his desperation palpable when he saw that no one was moving to assist the man. Kaneko nodded, recognizing the truth in Isay's words, but remained steadfast. Danger, was all Kaneko said next. If you come any closer, you'll be attacked. Kaneko's words left Isay even more confused. The fear in her voice and the severity of her warning made him hesitate, but his concern for Hideki's condition didn't disappear. Isay looked around, searching for any sign of what could be happening. The fact that the man was in such bad shape but still standing told him that the situation was far more complex than he could possibly understand. Rias, observing the tension in the scene, stepped forward and, with a determined look, took the initiative. Kaneko is right, Rias said in a calm but authoritative voice. This man is incredibly strong, but he's also extremely dangerous. His spirit hasn't given up. We need to be cautious and make sure there are no more surprises. With a quick glance at Kaneko, Rias signaled her to act. Kaneko, responding to the gesture, gently pushed Isay away and slowly approached Hideki. Her senses were on alert, ready for any sign of danger. As she drew closer, an intense sense of bloodlust emanated from Hideki for a moment, freezing Isay in place. Bomb! Suddenly, Hideki, with an explosive movement, launched a direct attack towards Kaneko. However, Kaneko's speed allowed her to accurately block the blow, leaving Isay even more shocked by the scene. With the attack stopped, Hideki's body lost its remaining strength, and his body collapsed completely inert. Kaneko, now more relaxed but still worried, bent down to check on him. The ferocity of the initial attack faded, and in its place appeared the vulnerability of a man at the end of his tether. Hideki-senpai, Kaneko murmured, her voice thick with concern as she checked the visible wounds. Her usually rough movements became gentle and careful, their harshness replaced by a tenderness born of concern for him. Isay, watching from nearby, couldn't help but ask, "Are you okay?" His voice reflected the mixture of fear and curiosity that consumed him. Kaneko nodded slowly, but her eyes betrayed the anxiety she felt. She knew that, although Hideki had shown great strength, his condition was serious, and he needed urgent help. "We need to get him somewhere safe for treatment," Kaneko said determinedly. "If we don't do it soon, his condition could worsen." Rias, assessing the situation, nodded in agreement. "Let's take him to the club. There we can treat his wounds and find out what happened." As the group rushed to transport Hideki, Rias watched intently. Something about the way Kaneko referred to him reminded her of a name she'd heard before. "Hideki Saito?" Rias murmured to herself, her eyes widening in surprise at the memory. Akino often mentioned this young man in her jokes with Kaneko, but now, seeing him in person gave her a whole new perspective. "Is this Hideki Saito?" Rias asked, approaching Kaneko with amazement in her voice. Kaneko nodded seriously. "Yes, Rias Butchu. This is Hideki-senpai. I don't know how he ended up facing that rogue demon, but we need to help him now." Rias saw Kaneko's deep affection for Hideki reflected in her desperation to save him. Without wasting any more time, she made a decision. "All right. Let's get him back to the club and do everything we can to get him back on his feet. Be prepared to provide whatever help is necessary." With renewed urgency, the group rushed to move Hideki, knowing that every second was crucial. "And I hope you liked it. It may not be noticeable, but the demon in this version is stronger than its original counterpart. And since Hideki still can't match the strength and speed of Kiba and Kaneko respectively, that will come as the story progresses. When I imagine Hideki's suit, I always saw it as the one Nightwing uses in Batman Arkham Knight. Forgive me if they are not the best images, but they were the ones in which, in my opinion, the suit looked the best. That is, imagine that he has the normal mask, not this one that seems to be connected to the suit. That is, imagine that he has the normal mask, not this one that seems to be connected to the suit. Extra, I don't exist." Hideki had been staring at the same empty cup of instant ramen for what seemed like hours, lost in thought. His head was spinning, and a pounding migraine threatened to split his skull as he tried to grasp the magnitude of his situation. Frustrated, he kicked the glass, which rolled to the other end of the alley he had made his home for the last night. With only 20,000 yen in his pocket, which had dwindled to 16,600 after the nutritious ramen meal and a bottle of water, and some clothes to stop him from wearing his hero's suit. He desperately needed a source of income. Sleeping on the streets, though uncomfortable, was manageable for now. His hero's suit, while not the most comfortable, at least protected him from the cold. Still angry, frustrated, and with his stomach growling, Hideki decided to move. His eyes needed a break from the misery surrounding him. Maybe exploring the city would help clear his thoughts. A library would be a good place to start, and best of all, it was free. Leaving the dirty, and probably red light district, part of the city behind, Hideki walked toward the center. He'd seen a map at a bus stop and adjusted his course accordingly. At least the city wasn't too big. A small blessing amidst the chaos. After walking for about 30 minutes, without even stopping to catch his breath, he reached his destination. The library was modern, clean, and welcoming, as if it had been recently renovated. As he stared at his reflection in the glass door, he at least looked less like a bum and more like a disheveled college student. As she stepped inside, she felt a warm gust of air that brought some life back to her. Perhaps she should reconsider her bed on the street. As she crossed the lobby, the man at the reception desk gave her a quick glance before returning to his work, saying nothing. But none of that mattered. Minutes later, Hideki left the library faster than he'd entered, struggling to contain his labored breathing. His research had led him to a terrifying conclusion: he didn't exist. There was no trace of a 17-year-old boy named Hideki Saito in this world. No 68-year-old Saito Inoki, his grandfather, a man who had worked as a renowned carpenter. He didn't exist. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she accepted this harsh reality. Every database search she'd done confirmed the same thing: there was no UA High School, the most prestigious hero academy in Japan, and Mizurifu. Nothing. His life, his identity, his world, everything was gone. He had no birth certificate, no ID, and no proof of schooling. Getting a legal job was impossible. And even if he miraculously managed to find one, he doubted it would pay enough to afford an apartment in the city. Besides, what landlord would trust a 17-year-old who couldn't even prove his name, much less his ability to pay rent? Surely there were also laws preventing minors from working without authorization. The cool evening air hit his face as he stepped out of the library, but Hideki barely noticed. Every step he took echoed like an empty void in his mind. The streets, the people passing by, everything seemed blurry, distant, as if the entire world had become unreal, alien to him. It was as if he were trapped in a dream he couldn't wake from, one he had no control over. He walked aimlessly, not caring where his feet took him. Every thought returned to the same dark truth: he didn't exist. He was a ghost in a world that didn't acknowledge his existence. No one here knew who he was, what he'd sacrificed, or what he'd faced. Suddenly, fatigue hit him like a wave. His body, though resilient from years of training, finally buckled under the pressure. He found a bench in a deserted park and sank down, resting his head in his hands. The headache returned, but this time it was more emotional than physical. The feeling of hopelessness settled in his chest, heavy, like a stone he couldn't lift. What do I do now? He thought, his mind in turmoil. There were no heroes to turn to, no friends, no UA, no nothing. He was alone. As alone as when his parents abandoned him. The same hurt, the same feeling of emptiness. But deep within that despair, something inside him refused to give up. That tiny spark, that indomitable fire that had kept Hideki alive even when all seemed lost. He had survived before without a quirk, had fought for his place in a world that considered him weak. If he had learned anything, it was that he couldn't depend on anyone to save him. He couldn't wait for a rescue. He took a deep breath, raising his head and looking at the sky that was beginning to turn orange with the sunset. I'm not someone who gives up so easily, he said quietly, reminding himself what made him different. He didn't have a quirk, but he had something many other heroes didn't: an unbreakable will. At that moment, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees. Something inside him calmed, if only slightly. There were no easy solutions, but he was determined to find a way out. He needed information, not just about his non-existence, but about this new world. He had to understand it. And to do that, he would have to be cunning. He stood up, adjusting his coat, and decided his next destination would be a place where he could get answers. He'd mentioned the library, but maybe he should aim for something else, something that would give him a broader view of the city and the supernatural world he was now trapped in. One step at a time, Hideki. One step at a time. With that renewed determination, Hideki prepared to face whatever this new world threw at him. He didn't have superpowers or a quirk to back him up, but he did have one thing no one could take away from him: his indomitable spirit. Rias and the other clan members were returning to the Occult Club after rescuing Hideki, who was badly injured after his confrontation with the rogue demon. Kaneko, with a gentleness that few would have believed possible in someone of her size, carried Hideki in her arms, making sure not to hurt him. Despite her physical strength, the care she took with every step was evident, with an expression that showed more concern than she usually let on. The group walked in silence, as Rias's magic transportation circle could not be used by anyone outside her clan, forcing them to carry Hideki back on foot. Everyone was still coming to terms with what they had just witnessed. Hideki, a mere human with no supernatural powers, had managed to overwhelm a powerful rogue demon. Although he hadn't completely defeated him, his resilience, skill, and determination had left everyone in awe. Isay, who had recently become a demon, seemed the most stunned. It was his first time seeing a fight of that caliber, and he found it almost unbelievable that Hideki, without a sacred gear or any supernatural advantage, had lasted so long against such a powerful creature. "I can't believe it," Isay muttered, looking at Hideki as they walked. His admiration was palpable. "How is it that someone like him, being human, can fight like that?" Rias, walking in front, nodded slightly. "It's impressive," he admitted, though his tone reflected concern. "It's not common to see a human face a demon of that level and survive." Kaneko, meanwhile, could only focus on Hideki, who was resting in her arms. The little girl had witnessed her senpai's fight, and no matter how hard she tried to hide it, the sight of him charging into combat with such ferocity had left her uneasy. She knew Hideki as a kind person, always willing to help others, but seeing that side of him, that warrior who didn't hesitate to put his body in danger, had surprised her. He didn't seem like the kind of person who could hurt anyone. Once they arrived at the Occult Club, Kaneko gently laid her senpai down on one of the sofas. Despite her strength, her movements were careful, almost as if she were afraid of hurting him. Rias, taking command of the situation, gave clear instructions to Akino and Kaneko. "We need to treat his wounds. Remove his suit carefully." Thanks to the club's adequate lighting, everyone got a better look at Hideki's suit. It was an outfit they'd never seen before, a kind of modern armor, designed for stealth and agility. It looked like something out of a superhero movie. The dark, sturdy material fit Hideki's body perfectly, like a second skin. The club members exchanged surprised glances. None of them had ever seen anything like it, and all were certain that human technology wasn't advanced enough to create such a suit. Kaneko and Akino looked at each other, unsure exactly where to start. The suit looked complex, with no obvious fasteners. They decided to start with the limbs, thinking it would be easiest. Kaneko knelt beside his feet, removing his boots with the same care she'd used to carry him, while Akino focused on his gloves. When Akino finally managed to remove one of his gloves, she stood for a moment, staring at Hideki's hands. They were large and sturdy, rough with calluses that had formed over years of effort. Small scars ran along his fingers and the backs of his hands, signs of the many battles, training sessions, and trials he had endured. Akino, though accustomed to seeing strength in others, couldn't help but feel surprised by the marks left on Hideki's body. "These hands," Akino murmured to herself, impressed by the hardness they displayed. It was a stark contrast to the kindness Hideki always displayed, as if his body spoke of a life of struggle he concealed. Kaneko, who was also watching closely as he removed his boots, noticed these details with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Those calluses and scars were not only signs of his determination, but also of the countless times he had pushed his own limits. The little demon couldn't help but feel more connected to him, knowing that, behind his kindness, was a warrior who had suffered and trained tirelessly, all with one goal in mind: to protect others, even if it meant risking his own life. Both girls, now aware of what being Hideki truly entailed, exchanged a silent glance. As they continued their care, their respect for the boy lying unconscious in front of them only grew. With the boots and gloves now removed, Kaneko and Akino glanced at each other briefly before proceeding with the upper part of the suit. Both were nervous, not only about the severity of Hideki's injuries, but also about what they would discover beneath the strange armor. They worked together carefully, making sure not to aggravate any of his injuries as they slid the suit up, slowly exposing the skin on Hideki's torso. When they finally managed to remove the top of the suit, they both stopped for a moment, shocked at what they saw. Hideki's body was covered in fresh wounds, bruises, cuts, and marks from the fight that had barely ended. But what caught their attention most were the scars, some older than others. They seemed to be all kinds: deep cuts, scratches, even marks that looked like bullet wounds. It was evident that their senpai had been through numerous battles before this one, and each scar told a story they didn't yet know. "He's been fighting much longer than we thought," Akino murmured, barely aloud, her eyes scanning Hideki's torso. But what also caught their attention was how well built his body was. His pecs were firm, large, and defined, but not exaggerated. At first glance, they appeared soft, almost pillow-like, despite the obvious musculature beneath. Just below his pecs, a marked six-pack fit perfectly with his frame. Akino, although trying to maintain her composure, couldn't help but admire how harmonious his physique was, denoting not only strength but also perfect balance for fighting. Kaneko, although more reserved, also noticed the same thing. Despite the seriousness of the situation, she couldn't deny how impressive her senpai's body was. Hideki's muscles weren't exaggeratedly large like those of someone who trained solely for appearances. Rather, his body was that of a warrior, someone who had molded every muscle for combat, for endurance, and not simply to look good. Every part of his physique displayed functionality, as if every inch of his body had been sculpted by effort and the need to survive. Kaneko noticed his hands trembling slightly as she continued to remove his suit. The mixture of concern for his injuries and respect for what he'd done to stay on his feet troubled her more than she cared to admit. Still, she continued with the task, carefully removing the last of his suit while trying to ignore the heat she felt on her cheeks. "He's stronger than he looks," Akino said, a faint smile falling on his scars. "But this must have cost him a lot." Kaneko nodded silently. She couldn't help but feel a pang of admiration and concern at the same time. Hideki was not only kind and humble, but he carried with him the weight of a warrior who had fought in more battles than he'd ever admitted. With the suit finally removed, both Kaneko and Akino couldn't help but take a closer look at Hideki's body. As their hands worked carefully to avoid aggravating his injuries, both girls found themselves staring at him with a mixture of awe and, in Akino's case, a hint of more mischievous curiosity. Akino, with her usual playful air, let out a small chuckle as her eyes scanned Hideki's well-sculpted torso. Her gaze lingered once more on his pecs, noticeably large and defined, and then dropped to the defined six-pack that seemed to fit perfectly with his body, as if made for battle. The hint of puzzlement in her expression was soon replaced by a mischievous spark. "Wow, who would have thought there was such a stunning body beneath that armor?" Akino murmured, her tone low and seductive as she continued to roam Hideki's torso with her eyes. "I wonder how many more girls would want to see this sight." Kaneko, hearing this, felt a sudden heat rise to her cheeks. Although she tried to remain calm and focus on Hideki's injuries, Akino's comment only clouded her thoughts. She tried not to stare too much, but every time her eyes strayed toward her senpai's muscles, she felt a strange mix of admiration and nervousness. "No, it's not something to joke about," Kaneko whispered, her voice barely audible as she avoided eye contact with Akino and focused her attention on one of the scars on Hideki's arm. Her hands trembled slightly as she tended to him, aware of the warmth she felt from being so close to her senpai. Akino, for her part, couldn't help but notice Kaneko's shyness. With a playful smile, she leaned a little closer to the little girl, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Oh, what's wrong, Kaneko-kun? Did you blush because of Hideki's body?" Akino whispered, her tone soft but provocative. Kaneko shook her head quickly, though her face betrayed her discomfort. "No, it's just," she murmured, unsure of what to say. The truth was, while she'd never thought of her senpai that way before, now that she saw him like this, with his torso exposed, she couldn't help but feel a little more self-conscious. Despite his usual calm, there was something about the situation that made her feel strange, almost vulnerable. Akino, enjoying Kaniko's reaction, couldn't resist making another comment as her fingers ran over one of the scars on Hideki's abdomen, lightly brushing against his hardened skin. I suppose someone as kind as Hideki hides a lot of surprises beneath the surface, she said playfully. Who would have thought his body would be so worked out? No wonder he's so strong. Kaniko tried to maintain her composure, but Akino's words weren't helping. She kept glancing at her senpai, struggling with her own thoughts. She didn't want to seem perverted, but she couldn't deny that, at that moment, Hideki looked incredibly strong and attractive. As Akino continued her playful attitude, Kaniko could only look away, the blush on her cheeks growing more and more evident. Just focus on healing him, Kaniko replied in a tense voice, trying to remain calm. But even she knew the situation had already become far more awkward than she'd expected. Akino, with a smile that didn't go unnoticed, began to prepare her healing magic. As she invoked the spell, her fingers, already illuminated with magical energy, slid over Hideki's body in a way that felt unnecessarily slow. Her hand began to gently apply the magic to the most visible wounds, but at the same time, she took the opportunity to run over Hideki's well-worked muscles. How interesting these muscles are, like steel, she murmured softly, as if speaking to herself, but loud enough for Kaniko to hear. Her hand brushed over Hideki's marked abdomen, where old scars and new wounds intertwined, creating a blend that only accentuated the hardness of his body. But there was something else. Though hard on the outside, they are also surprisingly soft to the touch. Akino let her hand run over Hideki's chest with a kind of almost lascivious curiosity, admiring how firm yet flexible his body was. Every movement was an excuse to touch him a little more than necessary. It truly is a work of art, she whispered, chuckling softly as she continued to apply her magic to the wounds. Her fingers gently traced the lines of the muscles, as if each scar, each scratch, told a story she wanted to explore in detail. It's amazing that a human without sacred gear could develop a body like this. It's almost inhuman. Kaniko, who was watching closely, couldn't help but frown at Akino's obvious lack of professionalism. The way her hands lingered on every part of Hideki's body, and the way her eyes shone with a mixture of admiration and mischief, didn't go unnoticed by the petite girl. Although Kaniko was more reserved about expressing her feelings, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort at Akino's attitude. Akino, just heal him, Kaniko murmured, trying to sound firm, but the tone of her voice showed her growing unease. Akino, still smiling, looked at her out of the corner of her eye. Oh, Kaneko-kun, don't worry. I'm taking good care of Hideki, Akino replied playfully, though she was clearly enjoying the situation. Besides, I can't help but admire how well made he is. It's not every day we get the chance to see someone like that, is it? As he said this, his fingers traced a small circle on Hideki's chest, as if he were drawing something on his skin with healing magic. It was obvious he was in no hurry to finish the job. Yes, it's quite fascinating how much strength there must be behind those muscles, Akino added, sliding her hands over his shoulders and collarbone, enjoying the contact with every part of his body. Her smile grew mischievous. I wonder how many more surprises our dear Hideki hides beneath that kindness. Kaniko, growing increasingly frustrated, tried to focus on the wounds that still needed to be healed, but Akino's behavior kept distracting her. She couldn't help but notice how Akino's hands continued to explore more freely than necessary, and although Kaniko tried to stay out of it, she couldn't stop a slight blush from creeping onto her cheeks. That's enough, Akino, Kaniko finally said, more firmly this time, though still in a low voice. Stop playing around and finish healing him. Akino, letting out a soft laugh, finished applying the magic, although she did so with one last caress on Hideki's chest, enjoying the moment a little more. It's fine, Kaneko-kun. I was just enjoying the view a bit, she replied, amused, before taking a step back and allowing Kaneko to approach again. But you have to admit, our dear Hideki is quite a mystery both inside and out. As Kaneko bent down to continue caring for Hideki, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and nervousness. Even though Akino had been playful and brazen, there was something in what she said that resonated with her. Hideki's body, with all its scars and muscles, was the reflection of someone who had faced much more than he let on. Kaneko, now calmer after Akino's retreat, leaned toward Hideki, her small figure barely taking up any space next to her senpai's imposing body. Although she had initially only wanted to make sure his wounds were completely covered by magic, her fingers began to move almost automatically, tracing the scars with a delicacy that contrasted with the harshness of her usual expression. Her small, light hand gently stroked the edge of a scar on Hideki's abdomen. Unconsciously, her fingers followed the contours of his muscles, noticing how they tensed slightly even when he was unconscious. Despite his reserved nature, something about Hideki's image so vulnerable yet so strong held her completely absorbed. Kaneko wasn't the type to let her emotions get the better of her, but feeling the warmth of Hideki's body, seeing his chest rise and fall rhythmically with his breathing, made her feel something she didn't quite understand. Her pulse quickened, and her face slowly began to heat up, though she tried not to show it. "He's hard," she muttered to herself, barely aware of what she was doing. Her fingers continued tracing a smooth line from his abdomen to his chest, noting how firm and broad Hideki's pecs were, as if made to withstand any load or blow. Kaneko knew Hideki wasn't someone who boasted about his physical strength, but his body told a different story. However, in the midst of her trance, a soft laugh brought her back to reality. "Oh, Kaneko-kun, it seems I'm not the only one enjoying the view." Akino's voice sounded playful, with a hint of mischief evident. She had been watching silently from the corner, noticing how the normally reserved Kaneko had fallen into a state of fascination with Hideki's body. Kaneko immediately tensed, withdrawing her hand as if Hideki's body were on fire. Her face, normally cool and unperturbed, turned a soft shade of pink as she tried to tear her gaze away from her senpai. "Too wasn't," she began to say, although her voice sounded more timid than usual, betraying her attempt to remain calm. Akino let out a softer laugh, clearly amused by Kaneko's reaction. She leaned closer, placing a hand on her own chin as she watched the smaller girl with a knowing smile. "You don't have to lie, Kaneko-kun. It's only natural to feel curious," Akino said, patting her head lightly. "After all, Hideki-kun has quite the impressive body, don't you think?" Kaneko tried to maintain her composure, but the blush on her face wouldn't go away, and even though she tried to ignore Akino's comments, she couldn't deny the truth of what she'd said. Hideki was strong, both in spirit and body, and although she would never admit it out loud, she couldn't help but feel something when she touched him. "I was just making sure he was okay," Kaneko finally replied, crossing her arms defensively, though her nervous tone still showed. Akino looked at her with a satisfied smile, but didn't press the issue further. She'd enjoyed teasing her enough for the moment. Sure, Akino replied, her tone clearly mocking as she stepped back slightly. "But if you need more time to make sure, don't worry. I won't say anything." Akino and Kaneko continued their task of removing Hideki's suit, working carefully so as not to aggravate the young man's injuries while he rested. Now it was time to remove his belt, which at first glance seemed like an ordinary accessory, but upon touching it, both girls noticed it was quite different. It wasn't a simple belt, but contained several small compartments for gadgets and tools. "This belt is quite peculiar," Akino commented, sliding her hands along the accessory as her fingers explored each of the compartments. "It seems more functional than decorative." "Did you notice that, Kaneko-kun?" Kaneko nodded with a soft HM as she also inspected the belt curiously. It wasn't something they'd ever seen before, and it was clearly not common human technology. "It's not like what we're used to," Kaneko murmured, as Akino finally managed to unbuckle her belt with a soft click. After removing the belt with its gadget compartments, they both set about unbuttoning Hideki's pants, though they couldn't help but notice the implications. Akino, always playful and sporting a provocative smile, slid the fabric with a mixture of curiosity and mischief. Kaneko, on the other hand, remained more reserved, but even she couldn't help feeling nervous, her fingers clumsy as she helped. As he pulled his pants down and set them aside, both of them gasped. Even though Hideki was still wearing his boxers, the silhouette of his crotch was hard to ignore. It was impossible not to notice the size, and the thought made both girls' pulses race. "Oh wow," Akino murmured, a distinctly lascivious glint in her eyes as they scanned Hideki's figure from top to bottom. "He definitely has more than just muscles, don't you think, Kaneko-kun?" Kaneko tried not to look, but the temptation was hard to ignore. She knew she shouldn't be focusing on it, but her eyes kept straying unconsciously to the bulge. The blush on her cheeks was growing more evident, and even though she tried to stay focused on her task, her hand trembled slightly as she touched Hideki's exposed skin. "No," Kaneko muttered, quickly looking away. "It's not that bad." But her own voice betrayed her, and Akino couldn't help but notice her shyness. The older girl laughed softly, enjoying the little cat's reaction. "Kaneko-kun, you don't need to be so shy," Akino said as she applied a gentle magical touch to Hideki's torso. "It's completely natural. You don't see a body like this every day, do you?" Her hands moved with deliberate slowness as she touched Hideki's muscles, seemingly focused on healing him, but clearly enjoying every second. Akino's fingers ran over his pecs, firm as steel but surprisingly soft to the touch. Every muscle seemed sculpted, not overly large, but perfectly proportioned for a body built for battle. Akino let her hands run over his abdomen, the well-defined six-pack. "What an amazing body," Akino murmured, a mixture of admiration and desire in her voice. "Hard as steel, but with a softness that's very pleasant to feel." She didn't bother to hide her enjoyment as her fingers continued to explore. Kaneko, though much more reserved, also found herself touching Hideki's body almost unconsciously. Her small hands brushed over an old scar on his thigh as she tried to apply some healing magic, but the sensation of warm skin and firm muscles distracted her. The heat on her face was growing, and although she tried to remain calm, her breathing quickened slightly. "Two shouldn't be touching so much," Kaneko murmured to herself, but her fingers kept running over Hideki's body, feeling the texture of his skin and the scars that told so many tales of battle. There was something about the vulnerability of that moment that made her feel closer to him. Akino, always perceptive, didn't pass up the opportunity to tease her friend. "Kaneko-kun," he said in a mischievous tone, a smile playing on his lips. "Do you like what you feel?" Kaneko, startled, immediately withdrew her hand, her face completely red. "No! It's not that," she said quickly, looking away in embarrassment. Though she tried to hide it, the way she'd been caressing Hideki's body betrayed something deeper, a physical connection she didn't fully understand. Akino laughed softly, enjoying Kaneko's discomfort as she continued with her task, clearly delighted by the situation. Kaneko, still blushing, glanced quickly at Hideki before focusing on something else, trying to regain her usual calm. But deep down, she knew Akino was right. There was something about Hideki that made her feel in a way she couldn't quite understand. In a corner of the room, Isay watched the scene with a mixture of emotions, but one in particular stood out: a deep, heartbreaking envy. His eyes filled with tears as he watched Kaneko and Akino take care of Hideki, both of them leaning over his body. "It should have been me," she exclaimed in a dramatic whisper, her fists clenched against the floor, shaking with frustration. Tears began to fall down her cheeks as her mind repeated over and over how unfair it all seemed. "Not him, I'm the protagonist of this story." Kiba, standing beside him, leaned toward him with a placating smile, though clearly amused by the situation. Despite being used to Isay's antics, it never ceased to amaze him how much he could let his jealousy get the better of him. "Come on, Isay. It's not that bad," Kiba said in his usual calm tone, placing a calming hand on his friend's shoulder. "Hideki's badly hurt. You should show some compassion for him." "Compassion? Compassion?" Isay turned to Kiba, his eyes still brimming with tears and his face completely distraught. "That guy has Akeno-san groping his chest and Kaneko-kun caressing his scars. That should be happening to me," he sobbed, pouting as he dramatically slumped against the wall. Kiba laughed softly, unable to help himself. Although he understood Isay's feelings, the situation was almost comical. "I understand you're jealous, but Hideki's unconscious." "I don't think he's enjoying the situation very much," Kiba commented with a calm smile. "Besides, you should be glad you're both helping someone who's hurt." Isay let out a growl of frustration, rubbing his eyes to wipe away the tears that continued to fall. "It doesn't matter if he's unconscious. Look at the way they're touching him," she complained again, pointing at Hideki, who was still lying on the sofa while Akino finished applying her healing magic. "Those muscles, those scars. Kaneko and Akeno-san wouldn't look at me like that even if I threw myself at a demon 10 times stronger than me." Kiba sighed and patted him on the shoulder, trying to be the understanding friend Isay needed at the moment. You have to be patient, Isay. Your time will come. And besides, Kiba paused, looking at Isay with an even bigger smile. Don't you think it would be more impactful if you gained his attention in a less dramatic way? Isay looked at him for a moment, pondering his words, but then snorted again. You don't understand, Kiba. It's always him, the cool guy who gets all the attention. I want that kind of attention too. She sobbed, crossing her arms and sinking deeper into self-pity. Kiba, amused, just nodded and decided to let Isay have his moment. Thanks for listening to my video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and comment below your favorite part. Sayonara, see you in the next video.